Up next, a hearing of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Transportation and Hazardous Material. The subcommittee, chaired by Democratic Congressman Thomas Lucan of Ohio, met earlier this year to examine financial links between the television networks and tobacco companies. You'll meet a number of witnesses, including a group of Catholic nuns and priests who are working to convince tobacco companies to stop selling cigarettes by the year 2000. You'll also see subcommittee members question television network executives about the practice of showing cigarette logos at televised sporting events, despite the 1971 Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act, which bans all cigarette advertising on television or radio.
This hearing of the Transportation and Hazardous Materials Subcommittee of the Committee on Energy and Commerce will be called to order. Apology for the delay. Several members have indicated an interest, but I guess this is a little early on a Monday morning, so we'll get started anyway. The subject of the hearing is California's anti-smoking advertisements and the shareholders' attempts to stop cigarette advertising and production of cigarettes in this country. In 1988, the 6 cigarette companies spent more than $3.2 billion advertising and promoting their deadly product. This is a striking 26% increase over the amount they spent in 1987. So if anyone thinks that the advertising of cigarettes or that the cigarette industry is over the hill or is becoming inactive, these figures give the lie to any such reassuring thought. At today's hearing, which is the subcommittee's 10th hearing over the last 3 years on advertising, we will hear about the different grassroots reactions to these vast expenditures by these merchants of addiction. One reaction, led by the church groups who will be testifying today, is to try to persuade a majority of the owners of Philip Morris and other cigarette companies that the company should stop selling cigarettes by the year 2000 and should have its cigarette advertisements scrutinized by outside experts. Let me read to you a typical shareholder's proposal because I think it has the precepts that we all should be concerned about. Whereas in the USA, cigarette smoking kills more people than heroin, cocaine, alcohol, AIDS, fires, homicide, suicide, and automobile accidents combined. Cigarette smoking is an air pollutant more cancer-causing than many toxic chemicals widely banned. Children of smokers are more prone than non-smokers' children to suffer bronchitis, pneumonia, and other respiratory problems. In the USA alone, health care costs attributed to smoking cause disease has been estimated at $22 billion, with loss of work years and productivity estimated at $43 billion. While the tobacco industry has proclaimed concern for the economic fate of small tobacco farmers, their economic interests have been consistently subverted when cheaper imported tobacco could be purchased. An estimated 2,500,000 tobacco-related deaths occur worldwide annually. Our company makes such products for the tobacco industry as cigarette paper, porous plug wrap paper, conventional plug, and so on, as well as reconstituted cigarette wrappers. This is the company that supplies the wrappers to the cigarette industry. Resolved that the shareholders request the board to initiate the process of amending the purposes of the corporation to be organized to transact any lawful business not specifically rejected in the Articles of Incorporation, but the corporation shall not conduct any business related to tobacco or related products. Further resolved that the board take the necessary steps between now and then to implement this change. That is a typical stockholders' resolution being offered in tobacco companies today, and I think it's progress. A second reaction, led by the voters of California, was to increase the state excise tax on cigarettes and to use some of the extra money raised to pay for anti-smoking advertisements on television. These ads, which we will see today, are controversial, and one network, Capital City's ABC, at least temporarily refused to run one of these ads. The television networks may have a conflict of interest. While federal law has since 1971 banned cigarette advertisements from being shown on television, the television networks still have a strong financial links with the tobacco industry. One link is the large amount of revenues the networks earn by showing sports events that are sponsored by tobacco companies. $60 million on the Philip Morris Smokers' Rights campaign, along with the National Archives. The name of the cigarette and its logo is frequently displayed prominently during these televised sporting events and was used in the Smokers' Rights campaign of Philip Morris. Some of the television networks have another type of financial link. Capital Cities ABC and RJR Nabisco jointly own ESPN cable television. We will have an excerpt from one of the ESPN programs, which I happened to see the other night. Lowe's, which owns all of Lorillard Tobacco, also owns about 25% of CBS. Only tobacco companies deny that smoking is dangerous. And advertising executives who front for them also tell us that they're not convinced that tobacco is dangerous. But only those that we have come across will deny that the evidence is irrefutable that smoking is lethal, is dangerous to your health. About 390,000 Americans die prematurely each year. I intend to ask all witnesses this question. Do you agree with the Secretary of HHS as follows? Cigarettes are the only legal product in the market that are deadly when used as intended. Claiming an estimated 390,000 deaths each year in the U.S., smoking is by far the country's leading cause of preventable death. That's the question I think we all must face as citizens of this country. About 2 months ago, Dr. Sullivan, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, publicly asked the media to donate time for anti-smoking advertisements. I look forward to hearing today from California and from others on these issues. I will now, that concludes my opening statement, and ask if any other members have a preliminary statement. The gentleman from New Mexico is welcomed and is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me thank you for recognizing me. I think, as the gentleman knows, I've had some concerns about this legislation because of the First Amendment issues. However, I think what the gentleman is doing is very important, and that is going to the grassroots to see how we can deal with individuals, groups that have already made successful attempts at reducing cigarette use, cigarette advertising. I think another key, Mr. Chairman, is getting the tobacco companies themselves to talk about some internal steps that they might take that deal with some of their abhorrent advertising practices that are targeted towards women, minorities. I would encourage the chairman to deal with a hearing like that. I will say, Mr. Chairman, I admire your persistence. I am open on this issue, but I do conclude for now with some problems on First Amendment grounds. I know you will have some of the representatives from the networks. I look forward to their testimony, as I do with several grassroots organizations this morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. I might just add parenthetically that the tobacco companies have been invited to this hearing, and they've shown their customary reluctance to discuss these issues. Not that they've never appeared, but for the most part they do show that reluctance, and we, for the moment, have not pressed that issue. But I thank the gentleman for the statement and his suggestion. Let me open by suggesting that we spend 2 or 3 minutes looking at the ESPN video of the Camel Supercross, which I won't describe. We'll let the pictures describe it. Would darken the room a little bit because this is not a very big screen.
I don't know. I would think that Ward would be more concerned with riding his own race and trying to pull away as he takes the checkered flag. But he was putting on a defensive battle there. No matter, he got the job done. Ward wins it over Matasevich, who I'm sure is a little unhappy about all that blocking.
We haven't edited
Bale was third. The French world champion Tishner and Johnson round out the top 5. And the youngsters make their presence felt in heat race number 1. Heat race number 2, there's Jeff Stanton, the defending champion. Right behind him, Jeff Ward, 2 times the Supercross champ. So the veterans are coming back in the second and final heat race and making their presence felt. It's Stanton out front, followed by Jeff Ward. Let's put this business of Jeff Stanton being a veteran into perspective.
Again, the camel
Certainly you have to
signs
call the series champion back.
that are the
but
fence
keep in mind
around the
up
track.
until last year, about
Camel
this time,
Supercross.
this kid had never won a
The camera
Supercross race. He's only
angles
21
obviously
years old.
pick up
He
camel.
definitely inherited the top spot in Team Honda when Ricky Johnson got hurt. Made the
Just
best of it, won the
accidentally, I'm sure.
championship. Ward, on the other hand, number 3, has been around, seems like forever. Started racing when he was 4.
Good point. He has been around for a long time, but he still rides effectively. As a matter of fact, Ward has been, throughout the series to date, one of the fastest, if not the single fastest rider on the track. But he has been plagued with problems and bad luck, most of which, I might add, have not been his doing. Meanwhile, Jeff Stanton is starting now to leave the rest of the field in heat race number 2. Ward has dropped back about 5, 6 bike lengths aboard that lime green Kawasaki. It's Mike Kaprowski, number 11 aboard a Honda. In third place, Mike LaRocco from Team Suzuki has moved to the number 4 position. Heat race number 2
So I
winding
watched the
down.
program for about a half an hour. I'm sure I saw it at least 30
here as they
times.
work through the whoop-de-doos. It looks like
Which has a big
Kaprowski
camel
and
banner
LaRocco
across
maybe
it.
closing
There's
it up a
camel.
little bit. A little bobble right there by Stanton. Keep in mind that Jeff won the last series race. And said
When
going
they
into
go
the series,
particularly
he was gonna
high,
take the
there's a
first 2
big
or 3
camel
races
sign on the
pretty
roof of the
conservatively,
stadium.
Let things sort themselves
comes
out.
into
I don't
play.
think he was prepared for Damon
If we
Bradshaw
continue to play it.
2 opening round victories, but I think Stanton's right where he
All
wants
the
to be in
camera
terms of
angles,
defending his
angles
championship.
favor.
We come back to that question, rookies and veterans. Now,
I
we're
guess they
seeing
haven't
an
gotten to that
example
part of the
now
track
how
yet.
the veterans would
We'll give
play it.
another 15
Jeff Ward
seconds.
is following Jeff Stanton, and he's content to pick over the lines. He's watching where Stanton is going, and if the opportunity presents itself, then he'll try to make a pass. Now, the rookies, I promise you, would not wait. They would have the wheel in sideways. They'd have it upside
More
down.
camel,
They'd have it underneath.
more
Anywhere they
camel,
could stick it.
all
And as a
camel.
matter of fact, here comes Mike LaRocco. He's not waiting for anyone.
Let's give a call, too, to Damon Bradshaw, number 8, being lapped here with the hurt foot, slid down early.
Wonder how many impressions we've had in the last
Here is the
2 minutes this has
checkered
been
flag
on.
for number 1, Jeff Stanton. Good finish for Mike LaRocco.
LaRocco coming on hard
Well,
the last couple of laps, finishing
We
in the
could
number
play
2
it further, but
position.
you'll have to
Jeff
take
Ward
my word
finishing
for it
in
that as we
third.
get into it,
The wake on that last lap. Mike
we'll
Kaprowski fourth, rounding out the top 5.
can suspend the picture.
From Stillwater, Oklahoma. Stay tuned.
ESPN. All right, we'll call the first panel. While they're gathering, the first panel is Dr. Kenneth Kaiser, Sister Carol Costin, Father Michael Crosby, Sister Marie Lucy, and Paul Newhauser, Miss Jean Pinard. What is the Marlboro bit?
Crosby.
Dr. Kaiser, we appreciate your attendance. Your title is, you're with the state of California,
I'm the director of the California Department of Health Services, sir.
and you are charged with the anti-smoking campaign of the state of California following proposition. What proposition was that?
This is Proposition 99, the tobacco tax initiative. If you would like, sir, I have some comments to
All right, I
make to
just
the
wanted to introduce you properly and to thank you for your attendance because the campaign has drawn so much reaction. And personally, I think that is most important, that we put cigarette smoking in proper perspective. And I think the campaign in California has done a great deal in putting it in proper perspective, as you will describe. And you are certainly to be congratulated, and we appreciate your coming this distance. And now you may proceed in any way that you feel will be helpful.
Well, thank you, and good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. As I noted, I am Dr. Kenneth W. Kaiser, Director of the California Department of Health Services. I certainly want to thank you for the opportunity to provide comments to you this morning on California's Proposition 99 and the legislatively mandated anti-tobacco use media campaign that is being financed by a very small part of the Proposition 99 revenues. As you may know from information that's previously been provided to committee staff, Proposition 99, or the Tobacco Tax Initiative, was a grassroots supported ballot initiative passed by a substantial margin in November of 1988. The measure levied an additional 25-cent per pack user fee on cigarettes, as well as other amounts on other tobacco products. The measure is expected to generate about $700 million a year in new state revenues, which are mandated by the initiative to go into one of 6 special accounts that may be used for 5 specified purposes. The majority of the funds education and related services. And most of the approximately $220 million that are so designated for the current and upcoming state fiscal years will go to local health departments, schools, and community-based organizations. However, the California State Legislature specified in the legislation that implemented Proposition 99 that $28.6 million should go into an anti-smoking media campaign. And while representing only 2% of the Proposition 99 funds, it is this campaign that has attracted so much national attention and is one of the subjects of this morning's hearings. Now, in designing and implementing the media campaign, we expected to engender some controversy, a response which we believe will facilitate the goal of making our target audiences more aware of both the dangers of smoking and the advertising practices of the tobacco industry. Some of the commercials are hard-hitting, as messages that try to prevent people from becoming addicted to a lethal, albeit legal, drug have to be. For example, one of the commercials, which has been dubbed Industry Spokesman, has been accused by some critics as portraying the tobacco industry executives unfairly. We admit that the commercial is tough, but instead of being unfair, we believe that it makes legitimate points, namely, that the tobacco companies need a constant supply of new smokers to stay in business, and that luring people to smoking is a morally dubious activity. Similarly, some have criticized the commercials for presenting something other than health statistics. Well, the statistics themselves show that the usual mundane public health approach is not good enough. Hygiene lectures just won't do it. People continue to smoke and take up smoking despite overwhelmingly convincing statistical evidence of its dangers and repeated health warnings along those lines. The data showing that smoking and other tobacco use is not healthy is not news anymore. What people need is information that helps protect them against the fatal illusions that the tobacco industry has carefully crafted over the past many years. The tobacco industry spends hundreds of millions of dollars each year promoting images of attractive, sexy, successful, and powerful people smoking. We are taking an untraditional approach and challenging that image. We want to make people aware of the tobacco industry's advertising and promotion. The tobacco companies have effectively used emotional mechanisms to override the common sense that people ought to have about cigarettes. And as anyone who has ever smoked can tell you, the searing smoke that burned their lungs when they inhaled their first cigarette was anything but pleasing. Because of an erroneous image of what smoking was all about, however, they forced the fire into their lungs. Indeed, before tobacco can mess up your lungs or heart, the tobacco companies have to mess up your brain. In conclusion, then, let me remind the subcommittee that the link between tobacco use and various fatal diseases is no longer reasonably disputed. Arguments that contend our anti-smoking commercials are one-sided or unfair miss the point. Being one-sided is wrong only when the facts leave legitimate room for debate. However, there is no valid health argument in defense of smoking, and frankly, we feel no compulsion to bend over backwards to spare the feelings of those persons who encourage and promote a known lethal activity and dangerous drug addiction. In California, we have embarked on an untraditional anti-smoking campaign that is not focused on any one common theme, except, of course, that smoking is deadly. We're going to use hard-hitting commercials, humor, music, and whatever else works. Unfortunately, since this type of anti-tobacco use campaign has never been done before, and unlike the tobacco industry, which has had decades to perfect its masterful methods of misleading marketing, we are new to this business. We are having to blaze a new trail, and our experience may mean that we have a few rough edges at times. I can assure you, though, that over time we will perfect our technique. Now, pursuant to your request, Mr. Chairman, I have brought with me a tape of the initial few ads that have been released and that are now airing on television stations throughout California, as well as a tape of some of the radio ads that are also airing. And with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I would like to show these ads at this time.
I'll ask unanimous consent that the ads be shown, and without objection, the staff may proceed. We'll try to dim the lights again, and we apologize for the quality that we've had so far.
Let me tell you, there should be 6 ads on this tape. The first one is 45 seconds. The following 4 are 10 seconds each, and then the last one is 30 seconds.
Is this one of the ads? Is this one of the ads? This is not one of the ads? Dr. Kaiser, this is not one of your ads?
Well, there's nothing on the screen here, so that's not one of our ads.
Well, that's the joys of cigarette smoking. Nothing on the screen. I guess we're seeing some live show on the screen facing the panel here.
The first ad on the tape is the one that has been dubbed industry spokesman, and I think it will be evident when the technical difficulties are overcome here.
This is the smoke-filled room.
This is the smoke-filled room one, yes, sir. The following 4 very short spots have to do with secondary or passive smoke.
Gentlemen, the tobacco industry has a very serious multi-billion-dollar problem. We need more cigarette smokers, pure and simple. Every day, 2,000 Americans stop smoking, and another 1,100 also quit. Actually, technically, they die. That means that this business needs 3,000 fresh new volunteers every day. So, forget about all that. Cancer, heart disease, emphysema, stroke stuff. Gentlemen, we're not in this business for our health.
Have you been getting a picture on the...
Yes. The next one's the last one on this tape.
Now let me get this straight. You want to put this in your mouth?
That's all for that tape. Now, I also brought with me, if you would like to hear it, an audio recording of both a rap song that's been produced, that the video is being taped as we speak, and then some other ads. And
Are we ready to go? Are the technicians ready to go? These are radio
these are
commercials now.
Yes, these are currently airing on radio stations. The first one that you hear, the rap song, is also a video that is being filmed almost as we speak. It will be out soon.
Doesn't need to be around?
I think it's going the wrong direction. It was at the beginning. So.
Okay. You ready in just a second?
Do we know how to project it?
Is it going?
How are we doing?
Should be starting in just a moment, sir.
If one is not a connoisseur of rap music, you may have to listen to the first one a few times to get all the words. I've had to.
Well, while we're working on that, let's move on to another witness, and we can interrupt then when we get the sound. Father Crosby?
Good morning.
Thank you for coming. I believe we have your testimony.
Okay.
We appreciate your going ahead, and
Thank you.
without objection, it'll be received, and you may proceed any way you feel will be helpful.
Okay. Mr. Luquin and distinguished House members of the committee, my name is Michael Crosby. I'm a religious brother in the Capuchin Franciscan Order, the Midwest Province, and I'm based in Berkeley, California. I'm also the coordinator of the tobacco issue for the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. So on behalf of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, I want to thank you for holding this hearing on our 1990 shareholder resolutions related to smoking and health. To our knowledge, this is the first time any congressional or Senate committee has had hearings on shareholder resolutions per se. So we feel that we are very happy to be here in this effort to bring our concerns to a broader public. The ICCR is an ecumenical coalition of 25 major Protestant denominations and about 250 Catholic religious orders and dioceses who are using their investments to try to bring about social change on issues that concern them. We've been involved since 1971 when we began in the issue of South Africa and General Motors. This year, members of ICCR sponsored a record 220 shareholder responsibility resolutions to 157 different companies. In terms of tobacco, there were 4 companies with 2 different resolutions. The fact that the issue of tobacco is an ICCR concern indicates the process that is used for getting an individual member's concern to become an ICCR issue. And I'd like to explain how this became an issue of the churches. It began in 1980 when I visited Latin America, and there I saw the massive amount of advertising that was done there without any kind of warnings to combat the advertising so that people would be properly informed. And so at that time, my province of brothers bought 10 shares of stock in RJR, was R.J. Reynolds in those days, and in Philip Morris, so that we could bring our concerns about what was happening mainly in the third world related to advertising. That with this massive advertising, with free samples, with dirt bike races, with motorcycle races, with rally car races in Guatemala and different places where I saw them myself, sponsored by Marlboro, we raised the question of what are you doing in the third world when you aren't informing the people, when governments don't inform them about what's happening with the health hazards. And so we started relating our concerns to the companies and never got anywhere in terms of bringing about any private effort by the companies to change their practices. This, by the way, has been one of our main contentions as we've gone to the shareholder resolution route related to divestment for the year 2000. A couple years ago in the Philippines, there were a group of families and lawyers who began suing RJR and Philip Morris on the rationale that they were not informing smokers in the Philippines about health hazards because the government in the Philippines weren't putting any labels or demanding any labels or weren't having any counter-advertising. And so already RJR and Philip Morris were being sued because the people weren't being informed in the ads and in the promotions and in other forms that there is health hazards related to smoking. And so we use that as kind of a warning saying that in this country, the companies are able to be free of litigation because they can argue that there are health hazards warnings put on the labels or on ads. And we're saying in the World Court, when this litigation comes to a World Court, we are warning you now that you aren't putting on the ads that there are some health hazards connected to it, and you are going to be liable for this. But we haven't gotten any further on this. Mr. Newhouser is going to be speaking to the resolutions itself. However, just since I submitted my material last week, there's been some significant things that have happened, and I think that this supports why this committee is on a cutting edge of the issue. There was an article in the Washington Post last Thursday called Smoking and Stigma. And in the article, Michael Kingsley makes it clear that there's a revolution going on. And I see this committee's concerns and your concerns over the years as part of this moral revolution. He was saying that what's happening in this country is that we're seeing a critical mass kind of surround the whole dynamic of smoking and health, where we are beginning to see that it is basically a moral issue and that this must be raised. He says that the smoking habit has drifted down since '64 from 40% to 29% of the adult population. And he said, practical problems aside, informed adults have the right to behave foolishly. Tobacco companies are still regarded as relatively normal members of the business establishment. People work for them, invest in them, sell to them, and buy from them without giving it too much thought. But now we're seeing an ad such as our state of California is presenting, that people are saying that there isn't just this normal business as usual. We're starting to see moral connections. We're starting to see people involved in making decisions that are having detrimental effect on the health of this country. It said a firm whose product kills 350,000 Americans a year was barely mentioned when the RJR-Nabisco merger took place in terms of the buyout. He says that more and more we're beginning to see that the anomalies have to be addressed. There is this critical mass developing, and I think that what is happening is being helped by our efforts, the efforts to stop smoking on planes, and so on and so forth. I'd like to just conclude with how I concluded my representation at the shareholder meeting last week at Philip Morris. I was there on behalf of our shareholder resolutions, two of which went to Philip Morris. The first called for a review committee to establish what is happening with their ads and their ad promotions to children. The company says, on the one hand, that it doesn't market and orient its ads towards youth. However, this is not supported by a New York Times article that says, in terms of the California ads, that the ads will be directed at some of the groups to which tobacco companies try to market their products. Last week's Economist in England noted how the tobacco companies are marketing toward racial minorities, women, and youth. It was brought up again at the company. There was excellent data that was presented just related to Philip Morris's Marlboro product. 68% of all youths choose as their brand of choice Marlboro. 750 packs per minute of Marlboro are sold to minors through vending machines and other sales. Philip Morris realizes over $100 million in profits a year on illicit sales. I raised the question to Hamish Maxwell that this data is astounding when you realize the profits the company is generating on illicit sales to minors. I said, are you going to do anything with those profits to encourage youth not to smoke? He would not respond to it, and he said he wasn't going to respond to it. So you have an insincerity here. You have a dissonance. You have cognitive dissonance where on the one hand, the company says it doesn't market. On the other hand, the data shows that it is realizing millions in dollars in profits. What happens then is that you begin to say, is the company serious? And at that, I bring up the second resolution that we had at the annual meeting and how I concluded. I said something is wrong when more than 70%, actually it's 72%, when more than 72% of the company's products, more than $2 billion a year, comes from us because the Marlboro Man remains the world's #1 killer. Our cigarettes, I said there, feed on people's addiction to nicotine. Our company feeds on addiction to profits. Mr. Kaiser used the word tobacco companies need a constant supply. You can go across less than a mile here and you're going to see drug addicts who need a constant supply of their fix. There isn't any difference between nicotine and cocaine. In fact, they are both equally addictive. But equally addictive is our company's demand for more and more profits based on 70% of its profits coming from tobacco. I said at the meeting, and no one at the meeting challenged me, none of us can deny any longer that our cigarettes feed on people's addictions. It is time for us to stop denying that our company's addiction to profits is not at the expense of human life. At this meeting and at the annual meeting 2 or 3 years ago, I challenged Mr. Maxwell to deal with this issue of cause and effect. The companies continually say there is no causal relationship between smoking and health. I said, we won't go into that, but I challenge you to say there's no direct connection. If you're not going to use the word causal connection between smoking and health, I challenge you about the direct connection between smoking and health. Please answer that. He wouldn't answer it. I asked it again in a question later. He wouldn't answer it. Last Monday, a reporter called me about the meeting and said, are you really expecting shareholders to vote their conscience and not their pocketbook? I said at the meeting that I was urging the shareholders there to vote both their conscience and their pocketbook. I said we're giving the company 10 years to have an economic conversion. Thus, in the long run, this should be enough time to ensure financial returns without killing more human beings. And for those of us who are pensioners, or those of you who are pensioners, I said at the meeting, depending on those dividends, who are also of the Judeo-Christian tradition, you can be consoled to know that voting your conscience won't ever hurt your pocketbook if you have faith. And I quoted Psalm 37, and I said, neither in my youth nor now that I am old have I ever seen a just person forsaken or begging, their descendants begging for bread. And I concluded by saying, in the name of the 400 people who will die in this nation today because they smoked our company's products, in the name of the 50 who will die today in the United States because they passively inhaled our company's products, in the name of the millions who will die from our company's products in the future, unless this resolution is endorsed, I ask you to vote your conscience and your pocketbook and support our resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Crosby. You have been doing a tremendous job of highlighting this issue in the very effective way that you have done just now. And I do think it's interesting that when you brought it up at the meeting, no one gainsayed it, right? But in the official filing, And in the official response of the CEO of Philip Morris, they do say that it has not been proven to them, the connection between smoking and the serious health effects.
They say the causal connection hasn't been proven, and I said, well, I don't want to go into weasel words. They didn't.
That's not a weasel words.
Right.
Cause is the whole Megillah.
Right.
Right.
But so I said the direct, and they couldn't argue that.
Even under our legal jargon, cause is the basis, obviously. We'll get to the tape, I think, after the witnesses. We think we have it fixed, but we'll ask the witnesses in this panel to complete first. Sister Marie, is Sister going to testify? Give her the microphone, please. I wonder if the witnesses would try to stick to the 5 minutes. I realize that all the witnesses are equally important, but some of it may have been covered. You may not want to go over it again. And so I'm sure you're going to tell us something about corporate responsibility, aren't you, Sister?
Yes,
I think
sir.
that would be a good follow-up to Father's testimony. And please try, all the witnesses, try to stick to the 5 minutes. Sister, you're recognized. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for being late and missing some of the previous testimony. I did get lost in Washington, so I'm very sorry about that. My name is Sister Marie Lucy, and I represent the Sisters of St. Francis of Philadelphia, which is a religious congregation of approximately 1,150 women. We are engaged in services of education, healthcare, social, and pastoral ministries. And I request that my entire written testimony is recorded in the record.
Without objection, it will be received.
Thank you. We, like Father Crosby's committee, are share owners, and through our membership also in the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility, we challenge corporate policy and practices when we perceive them to be in conflict with ethical and social values. Several years ago, we restricted our investment portfolios from investment in cigarette manufacturers because we were no longer able to reconcile earning profit from this industry in view of our health care and our educational ministries. But because we wished to retain shareholder influence with Philip Morris, with whom we had filed shareholder resolution, we did retain some shares in this company. We maintain always that a company is responsible for the products that it manufactures and it markets. Father made it very clear that cigarette smoking has, even though the company denies that there's causal effect, there is substantial proof that it's an extremely serious health hazard. And while smoking certainly is a personal choice, that evidence abounds that advertising plays a major role in influencing people, and especially children, to make a choice that is addictive as well as destructive of the human body and also of the environment. The National Institute for Drug Abuse estimates that 38% of high school seniors are regular smokers. I would suggest that by today that percentage is probably higher. And as Father Crosby indicated, that 68% of these young people smoke Marlboros. The Institute claims that more children are addicted to cigarettes than to heroin, cocaine, and PCP. And studies show that the imagery of the Marlboro ad in particular appeals to children. It is of great concern to us that the fastest growing...
What is that imagery, Sister? You want to describe it? I'm sure everybody's seen it, but...
Yes, that huge figure of the Marlboro man, the cowboy, okay, that strong figure riding into the sunset and being a hero.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It is of great concern to us that the fastest growing group of smokers today is young women, teenage girls. And these are young women, of course, who are of childbearing age. It is certainly our opinion that cigarette advertising is deceptive and dangerous. Along Route 95 through Philadelphia that I drive practically every day, huge Marlboro ads are strategically placed to dominate the city skyline. One of my friends, who is a mother of 2 young children, recently told me of her concern because her 7-year-old son is now becoming very attracted to images on cigarette billboards, including the Marlboro man. Father Crosby made reference in his testimony to Latin America. Last month I was in El Salvador, And I was particularly offended by the extensive Marlboro advertising I saw in that country, where a majority of the people are poor, they're ill-educated, many are illiterate, so can't even read the print. They are plagued by a variety of health hazards. And in this country, the median age is 15. The Marlboro man here is dominant not only in the capital, but even in the desperately poor countryside. We were driving into one small, very poor town, and we were greeted for a mile or more driving into that town by a whole series of Marlboro signs on stone posts that were placed at regular intervals leading into the town. In its December 1989 issue, the multinational Monitor named Philip Morris as one of the 10 worst companies of 1989 for two reasons. First, for its attempt to achieve innocence by association in its promotion of the 200th anniversary of the Bill of Rights, and second, for its leading role in the attempt by the U.S. Cigarette Export Association to coerce governments in Southeast Asia to liberalize their cigarette markets. And I note that what I believe is another example of innocence by association close to home for me is last year's Philip Morris sponsored a literacy program in Philadelphia. Such attempts by cigarette manufacturers, I believe, to portray themselves as good citizens are devious and profit-driven. The Committee for Responsible Investment of the Sisters of St. Francis believes that cigarette marketing and promotional ads, and in particular Philip Morris's Marlboro Man, and also companies lobbying on behalf of the tobacco industry are unethical. We're certainly encouraged that for the first time the SEC recognized that the manufacture of promotion of so lethal a product as cigarettes cannot any longer be considered ordinary business, and did permit the resolutions to appear on proxies this year for the first time. So we urge this subcommittee to recommend changes in U.S. tobacco trade policy and to impose tight restrictions on the tobacco industry's advertising practices. To this end, we certainly do support H.R. 1250, which we understand would ban all tobacco promotion except for tombstone ads, and would prohibit vending machine sales in areas that are frequented by minors. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I believe that our generation is passing on to our children a world that is already overstocked with nuclear weapons. It's damaged by the poisoning of water, air, and soil. It's divided into haves and have-nots. And so I ask, must our children also be subjected to seductive, deceptive promotion of a product that will clearly damage their health and may also be the cause of their death? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister. As you were suggesting changes in our trade policy, I'm reminded that, of course, our committee doesn't have jurisdiction, at least total jurisdiction, very little jurisdiction over trade policy. And we will see what we can do to get a record of these proceedings, not only to the pertinent committees of Congress, but also to the administration, because we've had speeches by Dr. Sullivan, but we haven't had very much in the way of action out of the Bush administration here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sister Carol?
My name is Sister Carol Costin. I'm an Adrian Dominican sister. Our mother house is in Adrian, Michigan, and we are around 1,350 women. And I thank you, Chairman Lucan, for providing this opportunity to testify. Pardon me?
You're a Dominican?
Yes. Were you taught by the Dominicans?
No, but my kids were. St. Vincent Ferrer in Cincinnati.
Good. I hope they're the better for it.
I wouldn't guarantee anything about my kids.
Well, we'll share the blame then.
Yes, that's right.
The Adrian Dominicans since 1975 have had a corporate responsibility committee called the Portfolio Advisory Board, and our mandate is to try to look at our stock portfolio from the criteria of social justice to make recommendations to divest or to buy in order to do shareholder resolutions or to screen out companies in which we won't invest. We have in the past divested of Department of Defense contractors in the top 100, and in the last few years many companies that had holdings in South Africa. The reason that we've introduced the proposal to Philip Morris was to be in collaboration with other members of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility in raising this very serious health issue. Our resolution was similar to the one that you quoted at the beginning. That is that we're asking that Philip Morris not specifically state in the Articles of Incorporation that after December 31st, 1999, the corporation shall not conduct any business in tobacco or tobacco products. And I agree with Michael Crosby that that 10-year gives them time to do the kind of planning to switch from one product to another, as they in fact are already doing in some of their diversification. The Adrian Dominicans became interested in this resolution because of the effects smoking has on people's health. Other considerations are the growing of tobacco in developing countries, the effects of exposure to cigarette smoke by non-smokers and children, and finally the overall effects of tobacco production on the environment. In your own testimony earlier, Chairman Lucan, and in the testimony given by the other panelists, I think it's been clear the health hazards are very evidenced and documented, and so I won't quote from that. The second reason is production of tobacco in developing countries. I, too, have had the opportunity to travel to a number of these countries that are the focus of increased advertisement. In the Dominican Republic in particular, I remember seeing dozens of these large billboard ads of the Marlboro cowboy and the sort of macho image that gets reinforced in those ads. And in addition, a number of U.S. corporations buy large umbrellas and give them to pizza parlors and things like that. So you have this sort of pervasive presence of this kind of advertising in countries that are having great difficulties in providing even basic human needs for the members of that country. In the Philippines, where I visited 2 years ago, again you see these kinds of ads encouraging this kind of habit. And it seems particularly bad in the Philippines when we find that 12% of family income goes for cigarettes. And when you see the desperate poverty around that country, it seems a great misuse of money. And I feel that a company in which we have stock oughtn't to be involved in perpetuating that. The third, the environmental issues. Statistics show that 63% of the world's tobacco is grown in less economically developed countries, where there are fewer laws to protect the fragile environmental balance. In fact, WHO, the World Health Organization, estimates that 5% of all trees felled are used in tobacco curing. This, as we have been well reminded in the Earth Day celebrations, is part of the problem contributing to global warming. In conclusion, of all the points I've mentioned, we consider the health issues to be the most urgent, and this issue is international. Smoking is harmful to all human beings, and to this end we have been part of asking Philip Morris not to continue producing. I'd just like to make 3 comments on some of the things that the previous speakers or members of the committee have said. As Michael Crosby said, the conscience and pocketbook don't have to be in conflict. I use as an analogy, in the 70s, a lot of religious corporate congregations were asking the defense industries or corporations that had a lot of defense work to consider economic conversion. And in a way, we were sort of laughed at, and how ridiculous an idea that this is, after all, a very large and growing industry, and why would you ask us to think about converting to other kinds of products? And yet, now I think a number of those companies are seeing that it is possible that the defense industry is not going to continue to grow, and that in fact they're going to have to find alternate uses. And had this kind of research been started earlier, perhaps they'd be in a better position now. Secondly, I was on the subway coming here this morning, and I became an example of a captive audience. The train going towards Capitol South was held up because of something at the stadium, and right opposite me was a typical ad that I think is proliferating now, appealing to young women. And in it there were 2 blonde girls, women probably in their late teens or early 20s, looking extremely healthy and vibrant, and beautiful white teeth and a great sense of vigor. And I thought to myself, I wish right next to that could be a picture of one of my mother's best friends that I saw 2 weeks ago at a dedication of a child care building, who is in the extreme stages of emphysema. My mother's friend cannot get out of the wheelchair. She cannot go anywhere on her own. She has to be carried. She has to go everywhere with an oxygen tank attached to the chair and with the oxygen tubes coming out her nose. And I wish that those two things could be done in contrast. And she is only one example of the thousands and thousands of people who die, some of them this very day, for the hazards of health. Third, Congressman Richardson suggested that one of his concerns is the whole First Amendment rights in this issue of the advertising. And I think I'd just like to suggest that we have, I think, here some rights in conflict, that maybe there is the right to the free speech and the First Amendment right to advertise and people to make choices. But I think we also have to look at people's right to health. And I think that when rights are in conflict, one of the things that we need to do in making moral and ethical decisions is to look at the proportionality. In instance like this, which right, in a sense, is more important? Where is the common good best served? The thousands that die or the right to advertise? And I think that in closing, that we all have a right to health, and to paraphrase what's said on the Statue of Liberty, we also have the right to breathe free. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Carol. Mr. Paul Newhouser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Paul Newhouser. I'm a professor of law at the University of Iowa Law School, teach corporation law, and specialize in securities regulation.
And we have your testimony, which is very informative, very learned, and
yes, thank you, sir.
It will be received, and you may proceed in any way you think will be helpful.
Okay, I will try and summarize and try and stay within your 5-minute limit. Just as background, I have served as counsel for the last 20 years to various church groups that have put in shareholder proposals on a variety of issues. I have acted this past year as counsel to a number of groups who have put in shareholder proposals on the tobacco issue, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and the various Roman Catholic religious orders, the Adrian Dominicans who are here, the Capuchin Franciscans who are here, the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate, the Sisters of Charity, the Incarnate Word, and Ms. Pinard, who is here. One thing I didn't mention in my written statement, but has come up here and might be of interest to you, and that is that historically there are some religious groups that have refused to invest in the tobacco industry because of the harm that it causes, primarily Baptist churches. More recently, there are a number of other churches that have certainly taken this under consideration, as was indicated this morning. In addition, I am aware that the National Governing Board of the Episcopal Church has under the consideration the question of whether it should continue to invest in the tobacco industry, as has the Episcopal Diocese of Iowa. I know the latter because I'm the chairman of its investment committee, and although I abstain on all tobacco issues this year, the other members of that committee have raised that issue. Let me very briefly try to explain a little bit about how the shareholder proposal process works. The SEC has promulgated a Rule 14a-8 pursuant to the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, which permits shareholders to communicate with each other by placing on the company's proxy statement a proposal that all shareholders can vote upon. There are, however, some obstacles which must be overcome before the shareholder's proposal can appear on the proxy statement. Some of those obstacles are procedural, and in addition, there are 13 substantive grounds for exclusion under Rule 14a-8c. I want to talk about one of those in just a moment, but in addition, Mr. Chairman, I thought you'd be interested that one of the other exclusionary rules is a requirement that a proposal receive a certain percentage of the vote in order for it to be submitted for the next couple of years. And we have had within the last few days the votes at 2 of the companies to which shareholder proposals were submitted. At Philip Morris, there were 2 proposals. One received 2.2% of the vote. That was the proposal that the company get out of the tobacco business. That is not sufficient to allow it to be resubmitted next year. However, the other proposal at Philip Morris, the one dealing with advertising, received 3.5% of the vote last Thursday, and that is enough to allow it to be resubmitted next year. In addition, on Friday at Kimberly-Clark, 3.5% of the vote was favorable on the request that Kimberly-Clark get out of the tobacco business, and therefore that one is eligible for resubmission next year. The matter that was at issue at the SEC this past year was one of the other substantive grounds for exclusion, namely that a proposal can be excluded if it deals with a matter relating to the ordinary business operations of the company. This has been the most common ground for exclusion in recent years and has resulted in a fair amount of uncertainty over the years as to how it would be applied. For example, back in the mid-70s, the staff and the Commission initially excluded shareholder proposals dealing with nuclear power from utilities' proxy statements on the grounds that they dealt with the ordinary business operations of those utilities. In 1976, the Commission held a rule-making proceeding in which it decided that it was inappropriate to have made that decision, and that while it would not change the wording of C7, the ordinary business exclusion grounds, it would permit in the future the inclusion of shareholder proposals dealing with nuclear power because they were not mundane in nature but did involve significant policy or other important considerations for the shareholders to vote upon. Over the last several years, there had been a variety of Commission, or I should say staff, decisions with respect to tobacco. Initially, most of the ones dealing with tobacco were proposals put into airlines asking that there be no smoking on airlines, and also proposals to companies asking for smoke-free workplace. The staff had held that these were ordinary business. On the other hand, proposals dealing with sales in the third world, they had permitted to appear on the proxy statements. In the last couple of years, we put in shareholder proposals, or my clients put in shareholder proposals, dealing with getting out of the tobacco business to the tobacco companies. These were unsuccessful. However, this year I thought that time was ripe to revisit this issue at the SEC and assisted in the drafting of the proposals, or at least some of the proposals which appeared on the proxy statements this year. As you're aware, the various Roman Catholic and the orders and the Evangelical Church and Ms. Bernard put in proposals to 4 companies, 4 proposals asking that they get out of the business of manufacturing tobacco products, 1 dealing with advertising, and 1 dealing with lobbying. Initially, the SEC staff did not change its position and sent to Lowe's a statement that it would stick with its former position. I asked the staff to reconsider that matter, and incidentally, I have attached to my statement as an example, one of my letters to the SEC that involving American brands, which details the arguments that I made on behalf of the various proponents. In any event, after they had initially decided that sent a letter, I should say, to Lowy saying that they would not make the they would not change their view, I asked them to reconsider that matter, and they agreed to reconsider it. I can only speculate why they agreed to reconsider and why they changed their mind. I would suspect that, at least in part, it may have been due to the fact that they initially had some internal deadlines for responding to Lowe's, and that as a result of that, they had to get their letter out to Lowe's before they were ready to make a change in this area. In any event, they informed the companies that they were going to reconsider the matter. They asked the companies to submit any additional data that they might wish to have considered. The companies each did so, and on February 22nd, the staff informed the various companies that it had reversed its position and that none of the proposals other than the lobbying proposal could be excluded on ordinary business grounds. Philip Morris then asked the Commission itself to review that. The Commission did review it and affirmed the staff's determination. One other aspect of the shareholder proposal process I think might be of interest to you, Mr. Chairman. Rule 14A8 permits shareholders to circulate their proposals to other shareholders, but as might be expected, it also permits the corporation's management to put in a statement in opposition to the shareholder's proposal. The shareholders have the opportunity to examine that before it is published. We received the various proposed statements in opposition, and the one I would want to draw your attention to was Philip Morris's initial proposed statement in opposition to the proposal that it get out of the tobacco business. I have annexed to my written statement as Exhibit A the full text of the initial statements that Philip Morris proposed to make. They included such statements as the proposal is premised primarily upon a number of unproven assertions about the health consequences of cigarette smoking. That scientists acknowledge that statistics alone do not prove causation. That medical science has been unable to determine any specific causes of many diseases, including those which are statistically associated with cigarette smoking. That based upon unproven and unsupported scientific and economic assertions, the proposal implies that the appropriate solution is to get out of the tobacco business. Mr. Chairman, when I received this proposed statement, I got in touch with my clients and discussed the matter with them and received authorization from them to take two steps. One, to bring to the attention of the staff of the SEC these statements and request that the staff make a determination that they violated Rule 14A9, the anti-fraud provision of the proxy rules. I was second authorized that in the event that that either the SEC staff did not agree with us or the company, regardless of what the SEC staff said, went ahead and published them, I was authorized to bring a lawsuit against Philip Morris in order to test the question of whether these statements violated the anti-fraud rules. I so informed Philip Morris, and the upshot was, and I cannot tell you the reasoning of Philip Morris for having done so, or give you any cause and effect relationship, but in any event, the upshot was that all of these statements were eventually dropped, and that the statement by Philip Morris in opposition, which actually appeared in the proxy statement, contained none of these assertions that the cause and effect relationship of smoking and illness had not been proven. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any further questions that you may have.
Thank you for your very helpful testimony. Ms. Pinard.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jean Pinard. I live in Drake, Massachusetts, and I work as a pastoral minister in Notre-Dame-de-Lourdes Parish in Lowell. I'd like to preface my remarks by stating that I approach the issue of tobacco production, advertising, and sales primarily as a religious educator, a youth minister, and as a woman of faith. And I'd like to concentrate on the moral issues that I believe are key in the whole debate. It is out of that conviction that I wish to add my voice to help improve the quality of life for all by working towards a world where none would be impaired or would die from smoking or the effects of smoking. I presented my resolution, Proposal 8, to American brands, not because I have some strong vendetta against the tobacco industry, but because being a shareholder gives one the opportunity to express an opinion in an important institutional forum, that is, a business corporation's annual meeting. It'll only be my second time at an annual meeting, and I'm frightened to death. I'm convinced that as a shareholder, as an investor in American brands, I have a right and a responsibility to a voice in determining the direction in which American brands will invest my money. I did not buy the shares in the American brands. I inherited them from my dad who was a heavy smoker and who died at the age of 80, but who died with 10 years of lung problems and eventual heart problems. I want to thank the members of this committee for inviting me to present my views on Proposal 8. And I also want to thank Paul Gaudette, Director of the Oblates of Mary Immaculate Peace and Justice Ministry, the St. John the Baptist Province, for making me aware of my rights and responsibilities as a shareholder in the companies whose stocks I inherited. I also thank the members of the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility for their work in preparing my shareholder resolution, Proposal 8, for the American Brands meeting that will be held in New York on May 8th. My work with teenagers and preteens has affected my decision to support and present Proposal 8 at the annual meeting. Over the past 30 years that I have worked with youth, I have noticed that children and preteens are beginning to smoke and starting younger and younger. Many are hooked on cigarettes by the time they are 12 and 13. I have also become aware that these children and young teens can purchase their own packages of cigarettes, not only in vending machines, but in most convenience stores in our city of Lowell, that they may do so without notes from their parents, though they have not reached the legal age at which cigarettes may be purchased. And I question how well some can read the Surgeon General's warning sign on the cigarette packages. As a shareholder of American Brands, I am concerned that the members of the Board of Directors and the management are not concerned about the moral issues of continuing to manufacture tobacco products when more and more evidence is showing that cigarette smoking kills more people than heroin, cocaine, alcohol, AIDS, fires, homicides, suicide, and automobile accidents combined. I'm concerned when the Board of Directors statement on my shareholder proposal states that decisions relating to the nature of the company's businesses, including whether to continue to own subsidiaries that manufacture and sell tobacco products, must be based on detailed financial, economic, technical, and contractual information, in addition to legal and other information. I'm concerned that the Board of Directors statement that there is no mention made of the moral responsibility of American Brands towards the people who use its product. Can American Brands morally continue to manufacture a product that, according to our own government, through the Surgeon General, is hazardous to health? I'm further concerned that the Board of Directors of American Brands, in their statement on the proposal, in no way rebut what has been presented of the dangers of cigarette smoking. I'm concerned that a company in which I have a voice as a shareholder continues to manufacture a product that kills, pollutes, debilitates, and brings on addiction in its users. I'm also concerned as a shareholder of American Brands that the Board of Directors doesn't always see the handwriting on its own wall. In their annual report for 1989, it states, although the rate of decline in domestic tobacco's unit volume in 1989 and 1988 were slightly less than in the industry, generally such decline has continued in recent years. Decline in unit volume of the more profitable and significant non-filter and charcoal filter brands, which have an older consumer profile, have been in excess of overall industry trends. If we are facing a yearly decline in the domestic market, would it not make good common sense to begin divesting ourselves of tobacco products and moving our investments in other areas? I'm also concerned as a shareholder of American Brands that as Americans become more and more aware of the damage done by cigarette smoking, that our legal fees will increase as we defend ourselves and our products from the suing public. We may save money in the long run by getting out of the production of tobacco products. I'm also confused as an American citizen when I see that we subsidize the tobacco farmer out of our American tax dollar, then with that same tax dollar pay the Surgeon General to tell us that quitting smoking now greatly reduces the risk to your health. As a nation, we could save money either by refusing to subsidize the growth of a plant whose product is dangerous to health, or by not paying the Surgeon General to make statements on cigarette smoking. I further ask myself how sincere we are as a nation in reducing the harm done by cigarette smoking, where would we go for the extra tax dollar? I've not seen until this morning the anti-smoking advertisements now being run by California, but once I've seen them, I'd love to see them nationwide. I'm also in favor of preventing all billboard advertising by cigarette companies. I work in a city where the immigrant population has increased over recent years, and I also run teen dances. Next year, those dances will be tobacco-free. But at this time, I'm convinced that almost every child from age 12 to 18 comes in with a pack of cigarettes, and I need to go home and take a bath and wash my clothing before I can even stand myself. So something needs to be done to educate the newer immigrants in our country. As a concerned citizen and as an educator, I ask that we do all in our power to regulate cigarette advertising aimed at young people, aimed at women. I just cut out the ad to one of the women's magazines and see that cigarette smoking is very flattering. It brings on sunsets, an active, looks like sex life with the young boy and the young girl, and great peace. I think that we have to go ahead and do what we can to educate people of the dangers of the product which my company sells. And I'm in favor of increasing my own tax dollar for anti-smoking education and advertising. I thank you for your time.
Get the portion out of here. Thank you, Ms. Pinard. And the gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask Dr. Kaiser his experiences with the networks in California. I've been reading some of the network testimony, ABC and NBC, and I must say that when I had dealings in my own state with the networks over the drunk driving issue, getting them to do public service spots, getting them to put forth alternative anti-drinking programs, that they were quite responsive. Now, I noticed that all of the affiliates, at least the ABC affiliate, they accept anti-smoking advertising. Is that correct?
I don't know if that's correct or not. My schedule is such that I don't have much time to watch TV, so I don't know what is aired on television or not.
What is your view of, in general, the cooperation by the networks in California with your initiative? Has there been a positive interchange?
Overall, we're pleased with the fact that dozens of television stations are showing the ads. Obviously, they are being paid for such. Radio stations are airing the commercials. Obviously, one of the things that's very different about this campaign is that it is paying for their airing, is paying for it at prime time, and we aren't particularly bothered by the fact that a couple of stations have declined to show one of the ads, one of the television ads.
The ads that you produced, were they produced in your department?
No, we have a general contractor, a advertising agency in Los Angeles, which is the general contractor. It has subcontracted with a number of other agencies to develop specific materials for some of the targeted audiences, especially some of the minority communities. We are not developing any of this material in-house.
Now, do you favor this legislation on a national basis? Your state went ahead with a proposition. The voters supported it. Right now it's being implemented. Has there been any marked reduction in smoking deaths or smoking incidents at all since this campaign started?
Well, of course, it would be unreasonable to expect any statistics to show anything at this point, considering the fact that these commercials just began airing, i.e. we inaugurated the campaign only about 3 weeks ago. And much of the campaign is yet to even come off the press. We would not expect to see anything for some time. We have put in place, again, something that is very different and historically unique about this campaign, is that we have contracted for a rigorous assessment of the effects. And while we have some targets, we've contracted with various groups, universities, and others to actually assess that over time. The legislation that mandates or that implements the voter mandate does set a target of a 75% reduction in tobacco use by the end of this century, and that is our working goal.
Well, I think that's very good that you perhaps come back to this committee after you've had a statistical assessment of how well this has worked. I think I would encourage you to continue that. Father Crosby, I'd like to ask you about your experiences with Philip Morris. I've had the same conversations with executives of Philip Morris that I respect enormously in terms of work that they have done helping minority communities with contributions in many areas. I'm going to be very upfront with that. Over the years, some have criticized the use and acceptance of these funds, but unless I get an alternative from another company that's going to give me scholarships for Hispanic students, I am not going to get into a moral argument on whether this is correct or not. But I do want to ask you, in your efforts with Philip Morris, did you get any response at all that they might be reconsidering at least their targeted advertising against women and minorities? Or did this meeting, this shareholders meeting, occur after the recent controversies involving RJR and Philip Morris?
The meeting took place last Thursday, so it took place after the controversy over Dakota and Uptown for RJR. However, probably because of the approach that we took this time, there was a difference. However, it was interesting that as you listen to Philip Morris present its different brands, I just pulled out a piece from Fortune related to a sampler of Philip Morris products worldwide, that from Entenmann's Bakery to craft, in terms of craft desserts, Jell-O Light and Lively, Louis Rich and Oscar Mayer meats, salad dressings, natural cheeses. More and more at this meeting, they were making the connection between low-cal, low-fat foods and saying we are moving into this area because we know that this is a connection between health. But they never would admit that there's a connection between health and their tobacco. But meanwhile, all their other areas of food are making decisions based on the fact that there are health problems. They still won't raise that question, or answer that question that we raise about the health hazards. However, at the end of the meeting, for the first time in the 10 years that I've been dealing with Philip Morris, maybe it was because they've got a new secretary, but I was approached by the secretary of Philip Morris who said, let's talk about this issue. It was the first time Philip Morris has ever said to us they wanted to talk, and we've been saying for 10 years we wanted to talk. So hopefully there will be some dialogue where maybe in a less public forum we'll be able to see why the company is stonewalling on this issue and won't deal with it when all its other areas of consumer products are very concerned, indicate their concern about health. So hopefully there has been a step that's being taken forward as a result of last week's meeting.
Let me ask the two sisters, Sister Costin and the sister from Philadelphia. advertising, again, I'll go back to assuming that we're really talking about targeting television, network TV, since they're obviously the most powerful. ABC broadcast in 1989 over 600 public service announcements dealing with drug abuse. 2/3 of the spots ran in prime time. NBC, I think the statistic is 600 also during that same period. Do you think the networks are being responsible in this area? Is the approach a better one to try to negotiate these differences, or is the approach mandatory prohibition of this advertising? Sister?
I'm not sure. I mean, they fulfill all of their social responsibility by running these public service ads, and therefore that's all we should ask of the industry. Is that what you mean?
No, perhaps get additional commitments that deal with the public service, that run at prime time, that set up foundations to curb cigarette use, that contribute to hospitals, to research.
Well, I mean, I think anything that can be done to stop the root problem, which is producing the tobacco and then people smoking it, seems to me that's where the emphasis ought to be, not the kind of things that have to make up for the problems that have been put in place because of tobacco. I mean, it's like, where do you make most social change? And so to do some public service and at the same time not be involved in stopping that kind of production, I mean, it's like, whose responsibility?
But from your argument, you would ban alcohol and tobacco altogether. Is that right?
I don't think I made that argument.
Well, you said that the right of health care, the right of health is just as important as the First Amendment.
Right.
So it would follow that you would then want to ban smoking and ban drinking. Is that?
I don't think I said to ban them. I think the issue here was to ask Philip Morris as a corporation not to produce tobacco products in 10 years. In other words, to switch their product line. And I think that was what I was asked to testify on. And I was just answering your question about the right to advertise versus other rights, and I was trying to say that the right to health care is a very important right. And so that to have, I mean, I understood that some of the networks refused to air these anti-smoking ads, presumption being that they got a lot of other ads for smoking from tobacco companies. So
well,
it was kind of in reference to
where
that.
is that evidence that networks have refused anti-smoking ads?
That's what I had heard prior to this testimony, and so I...
You mean at this hearing? Or?
No, I had heard that before I came. And so, I mean, if that's not true, then that's not an issue here.
Well,
if the gentleman would yield, I think
yes.
The facts are that one of the California stations did reject the ads of Dr. Kaiser. That may be mentioned later in the hearing. But one of the commercials was rejected by one station in California.
Sister, would you like to say something?
Well, I certainly agree with Carol that it's the root cause that we are addressing. And as I said, I arrived late, and unfortunately I wasn't able to see the video of the California ads. But from what I have read and from what I have heard, it seems to me that because we are so certain that smoking is such destructive, addictive behavior, that ads that may be very heavy-handed and, you know, they may be perceived as harsh, etc. But I think perhaps they have a role to play given the type of advertising that the tobacco industry uses to promote its product.
I have here Los Angeles KABC has rejected one of the first ads. Okay, well that's unfortunate. It would seem to me that your ads should be aired. It's an equal First Amendment issue, it would seem to me.
Congressman Richardson, I think it's been pretty well shown that in terms of print advertising, the tobacco companies that have subsidiaries that are in non-tobacco related activities, consumer products, are able to have tremendous influence over magazines, whether or not they will have anti-cigarette articles. When you have a company such as Philip Morris that owns Kraft and General Foods, and I believe had a $2 billion advertising account last year, 500 million being related to cigarettes, that you have tremendous influence that isn't related directly to cigarettes, but the threat to pull an account from a TV station on Kraft Foods, for instance, or General Foods products, or Maxwell House coffee, or is a big threat there's like a Damocles sword that is over a company, over a TV station not to run if that threat is there. And the companies seem in the past to have made that threat, and it seems that this is operational in some other areas now.
Now, California, I take it, is the only state that has had anti-smoking ads mandated by legislation. Is that correct?
Yes, that's come from the grassroots. Minnesota has had a minor kind of anti-smoking effort, but nothing in the country is paralleling the California effort.
But generally, the California networks and the media have accepted these anti-smoking ads. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it's just these incidents where they didn't. Well, I guess I'm still troubled by the First Amendment issue. I'm not denigrating your cause. I think it's a very worthy one. I especially commend those that went to the grassroots to make this effort known, to convince the public of this. And it would seem to me, in dealing with a behavioral issue like this, isn't the logical route to let each state make this kind of decision rather than approaching it on a mandated federal basis?
Well, the government has had federal legislation related to other drugs,
right,
prohibiting other drugs. This is a drug. Nicotine is a drug. I think it's only because it's been set in place over, a couple centuries, something like aspirin, that it's now part of the parlance or of the language of the people, the smoking. Had this product been brought to the consumer, the FDA or something like that, the product of cigarettes would not be allowed on the market today. So it would seem to me that this critical mass that I was trying to refer to before is developing around this product, where more and more we're saying smoking isn't just a First Amendment right, because the whole issue of passive smoking, such as we saw in the ads, affects my First Amendment right. And so now we have conflicting rights, as Sister Carol brought out. And more, when you have conflicting rights, you need some other agency to arbitrate between conflicting rights, which I would think would be some form of government.
Well, the Chairman's been very generous with his time. Let me just conclude, Father Crosby and others on the panel, that I think what you're doing is important. What you're doing in changing the issue through shareholders meetings, grassroots, is the way to go. And I would encourage you to do that. And I would be very interested, Father Crosby, in any kind of response that you get from these major companies in terms of at least altering some of their advertising practices internally. And Dr. Kaiser, I think any results that you bring back to this committee that deal with whether incidence has been reduced, whether there's been some kind of decrease in use and improvement in health, I think would be useful. I quite frankly don't know how you can do that 100% effectively, but I think that data would be very important. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Did you have a comment, Mr.?
If I might, I would like to make a comment to Representative Richardson on the First Amendment issues. It's clear that there are serious issues relating to First Amendment. Anytime that the government comes in and tells anybody that they can't talk in certain ways and so on. In commercial speech, the protections historically have been considerably less than they have been in other areas. I can't remember the name of the case. The most recent Supreme Court case about 2 years ago involving gambling in Puerto Rico was the most recent Supreme Court decision in that area, which seemed to back off on protections of commercial speech that people had thought might have been there by a prior case. I will say that in the area that I'm most familiar with, namely securities regulation, we have historically had government regulation of speech. We have prior restraints, and we have prohibitions against speech, and so on. And that has been upheld over the years. And when there is the public necessity for limitations on speech, traditionally, if there are good reasons for that, those have been permitted. And one would think that there might be a difference, for instance, between the ability of Philip Morris to put in ads in the newspapers relating to the public issues of smoking versus attempting to sell cigarettes, and that the government probably has a much greater ability to ban the ads to sell cigarettes than it would if Philip Morris wanted to put in a proposal relating to debating whether the health hazards of smoking in general.
Would the chairman yield? Would the chairman permit just one?
The gentleman has the time.
What is your view then about the argument that tombstone advertising that would be permitted under some of the legislation would satisfy the First Amendment grounds based on that Puerto Rican decision? In your judgment, is it within the free speech?
I would preface it by saying that's not the area that I teach. But with that caveat, I would say that the answer would be yes, that would appear to me to satisfy the constitutional requirements.
It would, in your judgment?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Sister, are you going to get into the legal technicalities now?
No, I just wanted to make one comment back about what's the proper role for the federal government versus states. And I think, you know, in the principle of subsidiarity, where is a decision best made for the rights of all concerned? And if the federal government has as its purview the overall health and welfare and the overall common good of its citizens, and when you start factoring in the cost to the healthcare system of the effects of smoking and so on, I think an argument could be made that the federal government has the right to intervene in certain areas to try to stop this health hazard in the United States because of all of the attendant problems that come with it.
I think, thank you, Sister. I think this panel is peculiarly well qualified to discuss some of the issues that have already come up in your testimony and in Congressman Richardson's colloquy with you on the issues, the very vital issues we have here that are now being discussed. And one reason that we're continuing to hold these hearings is that I, for one, think that it's very important that we continue to publicly discuss the developments, and these developments are happening. The development in California, I think, is a very significant one. The development that your efforts with the corporations are maturing, that corporate responsibility is becoming a more real thing, not just mentioned in a few esoteric corners, but it's really becoming something that's being brought to the fore and it's being developed. And some of us who hadn't thought about it before are realizing that corporate responsibility, when we turn it over and look at the various facets of it, corporate responsibility is a very important thing. And now, this question of what is advertising is what I want to address to the panel. Because so many people have told us, for example, and which one, Sister, did you mention the Bill of Rights campaign, the Philip Morris, who mentioned it? And you, I believe, described it as being an effort by Philip Morris to acquire innocence by association. Isn't that right? And you further went on in a very hard-hitting but I think accurate statement to say that that was, on their part, a devious and profit-driven motive and a devious kind of a program. Now, evidently, Sister, you believe that showing of all the beautiful images of the Constitution and of the people, and they even brought religion in it, didn't they? Have you seen the ones where they brought? Now, you believe that, in effect, Philip Morris was wrapping itself in the flag and in the Bible. Isn't that what you're saying?
Indeed, I do.
And that's what we see all the time. As a politician, if I could put on a 60-second commercial like that and running for office, and if I could put on 53 seconds of all those beautiful images and then just run my name for 7 seconds, I would have one hell of a commercial, wouldn't I? And it wouldn't be advertising the Bill of Rights, it'd be advertising Tom Luken for Congress, wouldn't it, sister? True. Wouldn't it, sister? Is there anybody here who has any different view? So, despite what we have heard from people who do have a profit-driven motivation, Philip Morris is in the process of conducting a $60 million campaign in which $60 million are going from Philip Morris to the networks and to the newspapers. Isn't that right? Are those advertising dollars, sister?
Perhaps Father Crosby would know that better than I.
Do you believe are they getting advertising is my question. Philip Morris getting advertising?
Backdoor advertising. Backdoor advertising.
Are they getting advertising?
Yes, they are. And also there are states. I don't know if the federal government, but I know states allow tax write-offs for advertising such as that. So they're also...
So the federal government... Mr. Newhart, we know that much, don't we? That's not your specialty.
Not my specialty, but it appears to be advertising to me, sir.
That's right. And the effort of Philip Morris in this respect, as has been described by Michael Kinsley, as clearly a swap of cash for respectability. Would you agree with that, sister? Is that what you're basically saying? Now, in advertising, is credibility important? I'm asking some questions that may sound silly, but we have witnesses who may testify today to something else. They may. Is credibility important?
It's a difficult question. I certainly believe it's important, but I believe throughout the advertising...
Sister, now, credibility is important in any walk of life, isn't it? If I want to advertise my product, my credibility is an issue, isn't it?
Certainly.
Of course, so it is important. So Philip Morris is establishing credibility by portraying itself as the sponsor of all of these constitutional rights and the religion and so on. So that's part of the advertising, isn't it? You said that images are part of advertising, didn't you? Who said that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So it wouldn't make any difference if Philip Morris used the word Marlboro cigarette, or if it established its credibility and wrapped itself in all of those images and then just said Philip Morris. They would, in either case, get advertising for their product cigarettes, wouldn't they?
That's true, though I believe the images certainly carry a psychological impact.
But that's the way people advertise, don't they? Is anybody familiar with the NBC Peacock? You've seen it?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mr.
Now, if they put the Peacock on the screen, would that be an advertising for NBC television? Wouldn't it?
Without the words. You're talking about the image without the words.
Yes, you recognize it, right?
Yes.
What's the difference whether it says NBC and then the Peacock or the Peacock? You've already recognized it. That's the purpose of a logo, isn't it?
Right, Mr. Chairman.
As a matter of fact, one of the television companies going to testify today talks about the fact that they don't use the logos in certain situations because logos are something that are developed, isn't that right? I mean, I'm just talking about common experience. Is that right, sister?
Sure. Yes.
Logos. Now, on the Marlboro, you described the Marlboro commercials, or the billboards, didn't you, Sister Lucy, down in El Salvador?
Yes.
What are those?
Same as they are here in the United States.
But what is the logo on those billboards?
It's the macho Marlboro man.
But isn't there also another some of those billboards don't have the man on it, but they just have the logo, the peculiar...
Right. I have pictures that a friend of mine took Marlboro Safari Rally in Kenya, where it's just the red and white. The red and white of Marlboro is very, very impressed on people's minds at this time. All you need are the triangles of the red and the white, and you know it's Marlboro.
Sister, you're nodding affirmatively. That is an advertising for Marlboro cigarettes, isn't it? Don't you recognize it as such?
Yes, in fact, in the situation that I described, where all along the signpost into the port town, that was what was used, not the Marlboro Man image.
That's
of the
right.
logo
Just
itself.
the logo, which you described as a Marlboro ad. Did you not? Of course it is. I mean, we have to get down to basics because some people are trying to obfuscate the issue, shall we say. And they're saying because we don't mention cigarettes or we don't advocate smoking in those words that we're not indulging in cigarette advertising. That's absurd, isn't it, Mr. Newhouser? Such a proposition?
Yes, sir.
Father Crosby?
Could I add, in terms of what Philip Morris said last week at their annual meeting, in terms of their advertising, they say, we do not advertise to get new consumers such as youth. We advertise just so that people who already smoke might be influenced to change their brand to ours. And we discounted that.
That's palpably untrue,
right,
isn't
and
it?
we discount, but they keep coming back
No
with that
person in
argument.
his or her right mind would believe that. But yet we are having the people who have a financial interest tell us that.
Right. Not when they're generating $100 million in profits from illicit sales to youth.
Now let's take another proposition. General Motors is reputed to manufacture automobiles. Isn't that right? And if General Motors were involved in a $60 million campaign which featured prominently the name General Motors Corporation, would that possibly be an advertising for automobiles, Sister Carol?
I would think so.
Obviously. Would anybody in his or her right mind say that it is not? Yet we are told that Philip Morris is a $60 million campaign. Philip Morris, everybody in the world knows, is a tobacco company that puts out Marlboro and other cigarettes. And we are told that that is not an advertisement for cigarettes or cigarette smoking because nobody is smoking and the word Marlboro doesn't appear. Does anybody believe that's anything but cigarette advertising? And then we have the Marlboro on NBC. We have the product, Doctors Ought to Care showed us that 1989 NBC showed the Marlboro Grand Prix for 94 minutes, and 49% of the time the Marlboro logo was shown on the television screen attached. Is that advertising, sister, for Marlboro cigarettes?
Certainly is.
And yet, does anybody think that it is not advertising, or there's any question about it? And yet we're supposed to have a law that says that on television we're not allowed to advertise cigarettes at all. And then we just saw an excerpt of it on ESPN. You all saw that. I watched that thing for 45 minutes, and I will stake my life on the fact that there were several images per minute, more than several images per minute of the camel logo, the peculiar coloring, and the camel supercross, the whole thing, several per minute. I submit that that's advertising for Camel cigarettes. Everybody knows the Camel logo, the particular, know what a Camel is. A Camel is the brand name of a cigarette, and that's the particular one. Now they sponsor, a program is sponsored on the TV, and then the TV people come around and say, oh, we're not accepting ads on television. We're not accepting ads from the cigarette companies. It just so happens that the cigarette companies happen to sponsor those events, and then we put the events. What about corporate responsibility? Anybody got any comment on that? Now, what you have been telling us, and telling us very directly, is that there ought to be corporate responsibility. That if corporations are engaged in killing people, and someone said that 1 out of 6 deaths are caused by tobacco. So tobacco is involved in killing people. So those who produce tobacco are involved in killing people. So it ought to be corporate responsibility not to produce such. That's your argument, isn't it, Father Crosby? I've stolen it from you, isn't that right? Isn't that in so many words your argument?
Right, well, that's our basic argument. Just in terms also of the sponsorship, I believe Philip Morris was asked by one of the anti-smoking groups to change the sponsorship of the Virginia Slims tennis tournament to be something like the Kraft tennis tourney, and they refused. So
absolutely.
There's
We have
real reasons why they have, for certain kinds of sporting events and entertainment events, the cigarettes advertising that rather than General Foods products or craft products.
And the National Archives wrote a letter months before it finally made the deal of swapping respectability for cash with Philip Morris. The National Archive wrote a letter to Philip Morris and said, we don't want to have any business with you because you're a tobacco company. We've had it in the records of this committee. And they said specifically, we don't want to deal with a tobacco company because it's a tobacco company. But we'd be glad to deal with your food subsidiary. That's what National Archives said in their letter. Now, why they changed their mind, we are left to conclude, but I guess it has something to do with the $6 million and the $600,000 that was paid directly to National Archives, and the $60 million television campaign that mentioned the National Archives. They all did. Yes, they mentioned the National Archives. So I think that this is all pertinent to what is coming before us here today. On the question of switching, Sister, I think you said that Philip Morris is switching, or you mentioned in passing, to other pursuits. But as a practical matter, I saw the figures that Philip Morris is putting out more cigarettes today than it did last year and the year before.
I think the reference, Mr. Lucan, was that Philip Morris has been able to diversify somewhat, and if that's the case...
That means they bought the food companies in order to get respectability.
Well,
but that doesn't mean that they're does that mean that they are in any way understating or withdrawing from tobacco production?
No, it doesn't. I was mentioning that...
As a matter of fact, they've increased their advertising markedly and their tobacco sales markedly every year.
Right. The only reason I mentioned that was to use as part of the argument that they, in fact, if they wanted to, could switch from producing cigarettes to producing other things, as they have already done in those two acquisitions.
Well, they like to convey the impression that they are, in fact, switching. But let me quote from Moody's Investor Service, which I think is the Bible in this case. And the last time I looked, Philip Morris makes 84% of its profit from cigarettes. 84%. And for those who want to drag beer into the equation, it's 89, almost 90% from cigarettes and beer. And yet some people would have us believe that this is a diversified company which is more interested in caramels than tobacco. Now, obviously, if you're running a corporation to make money and 90% of your profit comes in from drugs of choice, that's where your financial interest is, and not in the 3% that comes in from Kraft caramels or the 4% that comes in from soft drinks. Those are the facts which are not always stated. I could submit for the record that the Marlboro Grand Prix on one of the networks, which I mentioned how frequently the logo, the names appeared, and obviously the camera angles were, in that situation, the camera angles in the Virginia Slims were in such a situation that you get the, perhaps it's not necessary with Virginia Slims, because in a tennis tournament you can't vary very much. You're going to be hitting that sign behind the, at the two ends of the tennis court regularly, but in the race, certainly, and in the motorcycle race, the camera angles were such to pick up the cigarette advertising. And what's concerning me is that we have a law on the books that says television shall not carry cigarette advertising, and obviously they're doing it, and the cigarette companies and the television companies are telling us that they're not doing it. That bothers me a great deal. The law is being circumvented. Does anybody have any Any comment on that?
And may I respond to that? We also have a law in the books that says that cigarettes cannot be sold to minors, and it was shown on Boston television that that law is not being enforced. So what good is a law if it's unenforceable? And I think the same thing applies to advertising. If nobody is enforcing the law, then what good is the law?
That gets around to swapping respectability for cash, doesn't it? If everybody sits back and says, well, I guess that's okay. That's I guess Philip Morris is okay. The advertisers picked Philip Morris, or what was it, Forbes magazine picked Philip Morris as the #1 company. Number 2, who's number 1? RJR Nabisco? What? Merck. But
Merck is #1 and Philip Morris is #2.
And Philip Morris is #1 in advertising, though. Isn't that right, in quantity of advertising?
Philip Morris was the largest advertiser last year.
It's past Procter & Gamble as the largest advertiser?
Yes.
And speaking of that, there are companies that will not become involved with cigarette subsidiaries or relationships with cigarettes. It isn't, I mean, those companies that come into us and say, oh, we had to do it. Not all companies have to do it. There are companies that have a policy that do not get involved in conglomerates with cigarette companies, that don't get into links with cigarette companies. And so I say this to you because some of you may not have thought of it, that you're on the right track, that when you demand corporate responsibility from these corporations in not advertising cigarettes and in not promoting cigarettes, in not even manufacturing or selling cigarettes, there are corporations that do have that responsibility. Would you agree? Does anybody have any comment on that? Do you find corporations that have that policy?
I think we believe that a company can do good business and also do well at the same time, can do good as well as do well. And yes, we have experienced corporations that have been very responsive to shareholder concerns and have responded in a corporately responsible manner.
Well, I don't have anything further, but I've said a good deal, and I'll be glad to have you respond in any way or comment in any way, individually or collectively, individually. Mr. Newhouser?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Your comments about the power of advertising that the companies have because they are such large advertisers reminded me that I can't give you all the details at this point, but there was an incident a couple of years ago when Northwest Airlines decided that it would no longer have smoking on its flights. This was prior to the time the federal law came in, and they developed an ad campaign promoting their non-smoking flights, on the fact that they had no smoking on their flights. And one of the tobacco companies, and I cannot tell you which one because I cannot recall.
One of the conglomerates.
That's correct.
RJR.
Then pulled its advertising, not for tobacco, but for the food side, from the advertising agency which had developed that campaign for the Northwest Airlines, which is indicative, I think, of the overall problem that has been discussed this morning, of the power that they have vis-a-vis the various media, including presumably the television media.
A little blackmail there, isn't there? Mm-hmm. Do you have something?
Just one final comment, and it relates to the First Amendment, and it's on a personal note that unfortunately a couple of my friends are still smokers, and despite this fact, because they began smoking before we had the knowledge that we have now, but despite that fact, they were very supportive of my coming here to testify. They have read something about the California ads, and they would strongly support the California ads because they are most uncomfortable with advertising and certainly don't want another generation to be in the situation that they are now. Thank you.
Anything further? I can assure you, sister, that not all smokers take anti-smoking messages with aplomb or welcome it.
I would like to.
I have had occasion to be in crowds, and those who have read of my position, I think that you're right. Many smokers, maybe most, approve of the anti-smoking, but many of those who are hooked, I think, are chagrined that when they hear of and they respond to the Philip Morris program, the Smokers' Rights program, that they have a right to do what they're doing, and no one has a right, least of all a politician, to abridge that right or to restrict it in any way. Father Crosby?
Two things. I would like to submit to, for testimony, the statement that I made at Philip Morris, if you would care
Without
to
objection,
accept
we
that.
appreciate receiving it.
And secondly, going back to the State of California ad, since I am a Californian, I would like to mention two discussions I had with two citizens. One referred to the boardroom ad, and this person, who is a high executive at Stanford University, mentioned that when she saw this ad, she found it to be, in terms of effectiveness, the most effective ad on a social issue that she had seen since the famous or infamous ad of the campaign to undo Barry Goldwater with the flower petal that ended up with the mushroom cloud. I mean, that is in the annals, I think, of advertising as being a very effective ad to bring across a point. She said she had never seen an ad quite as effective as since that ad. Secondly, I talked to another citizen, mentioned that I was going to be coming here, who is a smoker, who also smokes Marlboro, by the way, and didn't know that he was paying 25 cents an extra pack to, in part, subsidize this anti-smoking campaign of our state. And he mentioned how he supported the fact that that was going on. He didn't like the fact that he was personally paying the 25 cents, but he says, I'm addicted. And if this is going to help other people from being addicted, so be it, and I'll be willing to support it.
Mr. Neuhauser?
Yes, I had one final thing I wanted to bring to your attention, Mr. Chairman. One other thing that has arisen out of this, these shareholder proposals this spring. As you know, I'm from Iowa, and our paper in Iowa, you can ask your colleague on this committee, Mr. Talkey, the primary paper for the state is the Des Moines Register, which in the financial section, I believe it was approximately 2 weeks ago, had an article where the reporter had gone to the life insurance companies in Des Moines, and Des Moines is a major life insurance place. I'd gone to the life insurance companies and asked them whether they held stock in tobacco companies, and if so, why, since they were life insurance companies. The responses varied across the lot, but the fact that these kinds of questions were being raised, it seemed to me to be quite significant to raise those with insurance and life insurance and health insurance companies.
Dr. Kaiser.
Just a brief point. The response in the few weeks that the ads have been out the ads have elicited considerable spontaneous, unsolicited response from the public. As you commented on your own experience, not all of it has been entirely friendly. However, of the telephone calls and letters that have come in, they're running about 8-to-1 strongly in favor of what we're doing.
Well, the calls that you get, some of them on the other side may be organized by the tobacco interests, but the reflections that I made in my personal contacts in shopping center, meeting people at dinners or gatherings or whatever, I do know that there are some, and I have no way of knowing whether it's the majority or not, but there are some people who are hooked. They don't like it, but they don't like people reminding them of it, and they certainly don't like to be told that there are going to be any restrictions on that habit that they have. And I just mentioned that because I know that there are many others, as Sister first observed, who are addicted to cigarettes, don't like the fact that they are, and applaud any efforts to restrict it. I think there are people who are cigarette smokers who are on both sides. And, of course, Philip Morris, we're in a running battle with them. Philip Morris has had their smokers' rights campaign. They deny that this current one is smokers' rights, but I think we ought to give it the duck test. And it sounds like it's a smokers' rights campaign. I have nothing further. Is there anything further of this panel? We thank you very much for your testimony and for your patience. And we'll now call the next panel, the representatives, Ms. Beth Bresson, Mr. Alfred Schneider, and Mr. Richard Gitter. You'll all be pleased to know that our rent is only paid up till 1 p.m. At that time, we'll be evicted. So if any of you want to carry out a filibuster, you may avoid questions. All right, we'll take Mr. Schneider. He's in the center. Mr. Schneider, you're representing American Drive.
My name is Alfred Schneider. I'm Vice President of Policy and Standards for Capital Cities ABC, Inc., and I'm responsible for the clearance of programs and commercials on the ABC television network. I'm pleased to be here today.
You're doing pretty good, but I think if you pull that meat, if I turn mine on first, now if you pull a little closer and turn it on.
Better?
That's better.
Okay, let me go back. My name is Alfred Schneider. I'm Vice President of Policy and Standards for Capital Cities ABC, Inc., and I'm responsible for clearance of programs and commercials on the ABC television network. I'm pleased to be here today to testify on the issues this subcommittee is examining relating to cigarette advertising, and I will excerpt portions of my statement for brevity. The ABC television network operates pursuant to our own comprehensive code of advertising standards designed to ensure that commercials we air comply with legal requirements, are neither misleading nor deceptive, and are truthful as to the claims made and are in good taste. With respect to public service announcements, we believe that we have a responsibility to use our network's resources to inform and educate the public with respect to worthy causes and important social concerns. The network receives competing requests from a large number of organizations and worthy causes for public service announcement time, each of which has to be given serious consideration. We concentrated our major efforts on 2 areas in which we believe we can make a significant contribution to public understanding and education: drug abuse and literacy. In 1989, in conjunction with the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, we broadcast over 600 public service announcements dealing with drug abuse, and our joint literacy campaign with the public broadcasting service, Project Literacy US, known as PLUS, resulted in the network's broadcast of over 700 public service announcements in '89. We have accommodated messages on behalf of a range of other organizations and causes. Every day on Good Morning America and Nightline, we schedule a rotation of public service announcements with our affiliates having the option to use them. It is against this background that we'd like to comment on Secretary Sullivan's proposal regarding anti-smoking messages. We agree with the Secretary that messages which remind smokers of the product's health hazards and urge smokers to seek assistance to quit smoking are in the public interest. I might add that we have provided significant coverage of the health issues relating to smoking and to the Secretary's campaign in our news and public affairs programming as well. We're aware of the increasing public interest and importance of the health issue of smoking. While we are not in a position to devote comparable attention to that issue as we have with drug abuse and literacy, we will re-examine our public service allocation to determine what additional opportunities might be made available for anti-smoking messages. Our 3 California stations have accepted orders from the California Department of Health Services for paid advertisements that deal with the health hazards of smoking. The subcommittee has asked for our views on the Bill of Rights commercial sponsored by Philip Morris. The allegation that those commercials violate the law is one we have examined carefully in the light of criticism articulated by the chairman of this subcommittee. While we appreciate the seriousness of the concerns expressed, we must respectfully disagree with the views that the commercials violate the law. The advertisements consist of quotations from the famous Americans setting forth their views on the country's basic freedoms, and they depict children reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. No products are mentioned, the commercials do not deal with smoking, and at the end of each advertisement, the viewer is informed that the commercials are sponsored by the Philip Morris Companies and its subsidiaries, including Kraft Foods and Miller Beer. Sponsor identification is required by the FCC sponsorship identification rules. The last subject the committee has invited us to address is the allegation that television sports events sponsored by cigarette companies violate the Cigarette Act. The Winston Stock Car Race Series is the only event of that type currently on our network schedule. We have no arrangement with the cigarette company, nor do we receive any remuneration from them. We have taken steps both in our contract with the supplier of that series and our supervision of the coverage to guard against the display of cigarette products. We also minimize by contracts camera placements, even casual display of cigarette company logos. The only reference to the cigarette company which we permit are for the purpose of identifying the event by its proper name. It is our judgment that the mere use of names of a cigarette company or a cigarette to identify a sports event does not violate the existing law, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today. Let me just add one parenthetical P.S. It was fortuitous that on Friday night I happened to be watching an ABC program called Just the 10 of Us at 9:30 p.m. The entire half-hour program dealt with the youngest child having been caught smoking improperly, and the whole program dealt with the impropriety of young children smoking. I think that one program, again, which was not scheduled and which I had no idea was going to be on Friday night, was probably one of the more important aspects of the anti-smoking programming that is done by the networks.
Would you describe that program a little more?
It was called Just the 10 of Us. The father, as you know, is a coach. All young ladies.
It wasn't a PSA.
No, it wasn't a PSA. It was a regular program where the father discovers that there is a cigarette butt in the ashtray.
Yeah, but what
and he spent the whole program dealing with the impropriety of children smoking.
Was this produced as an anti-smoking message?
No, it was produced as a regular program, just dealing with the problem of impropriety of smoking.
It wasn't basically a message
Well,
program.
it comes out as a message. It wasn't intended as something.
Well, I know,
directed
but
to the program.
Casablanca could come out as a pro-smoking thing, too. We're not asking you not to show Casablanca.
Well, I'm not saying that we do. I'm saying that there are opportunities.
The Maltese Falcon or all the Humphrey Bogart shows, they glorify smoking, don't they?
Well, I don't
but we're
know
not
how many
asking
of
you not to show
I
those,
don't know
so
how
you can't, on the other hand, suggest that because some of your programming turns out to be anti-smoking, you're not taking credit for that, are you?
Yes, I am. I think that it's terribly important.
Really? Well, then,
Mr. Congressman.
what about all the old movies that glorify smoking? Are you canceling those?
I don't think we have any of those home movies on ABC. They're in video cassette. I haven't seen Casablanca on ABC for a long time.
Well, I saw it the other night.
I think we may have seen it on...
Is everything on another network?
Beg your pardon?
Is everything that's harmful on another network?
I don't know that, but I do know that we meet with our producers each year and we try to discourage...
ABC shows Superman, which has a lot of smoking.
I beg your pardon?
Superman.
I'm not sure I've seen...
Superman 2.
Superman 2.
Matter of fact, Superman 2 is the one where what is the tobacco company that paid for the commercial? Philip Morris paid the producers in that particular one, and
I think we may have done a lot of editing.
So that's one where that was a smoking message is paid for, and ABC shows it.
Yeah, I think we did a number of edits. We attempt to edit motion pictures where there was...
You think we did? Well, I'm going to rule out we think we did, unless you've got something to back it up, because
I'd be glad to
this is very vague, and we can't very well deal with it. We think we did.
I'd be glad to provide the committee with a list of edits.
Do you have some information on it? We'll be glad to hold the record open for providing further information.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman.
On that. Ms. Bressart?
My name is Beth Waxman-Bresson. I'm Vice President and Assistant to the President of the CBS Broadcast Group. I'm pleased to be here this morning to provide you with information on CBS's public service efforts and to comment on the questions you've raised. I oversee the CBS Program Practices Department, which is responsible for determining the acceptability of entertainment and sports programming and all advertising and public service announcements. The dedicated professionals that report to me seek to ensure that these programs and commercial messages fed by CBS to its 200 local affiliates, meet our rigorous standards, and are consistent with the law and our policies before they're broadcast into American homes. With the exception of ABC and NBC, no other distributor of video programming on a national scale devotes the time, energy, and money to maintaining standards equivalent to ours. The CBS television network carries thousands of public service messages to our audience each year. These messages address a wide variety of problems and concerns, such as the anti-drug effort, alcohol abuse, AIDS, the environment, and, of course, smoking and health. In 1989, we fed to our affiliates almost 2,200 anti-smoking messages covering such topics as lung disease, cancer, the dangers of smoking by pregnant women, and the serious long-term consequences of smoking by young people. These messages are services, to name a few. We estimate the value of the airtime donated by our television network for anti-smoking messages alone at over $8.5 million annually. In addition to the messages carried by the CBS television and radio networks, radio and television stations owned by CBS also broadcast anti-smoking messages to their local audiences. Currently, the only television station we own in California, KCBS-TV Los Angeles, is broadcasting anti-smoking messages sponsored by the State of California Department of Health Services. We're proud of our record of providing time on their network and stations for anti-smoking messages and for a wealth of other good causes. Public service time is in great demand by many worthy organizations. We intend to maintain a record of commitment to public service in the future. I'd like to say a brief word about depictions of smoking and entertainment programming that we've aired on the CBS television network. Since the early 1970s, the producers in Hollywood who licensed to us most of our primetime entertainment programs have shown great sensitivity in their own right and have responded positively to our requests for compliance with our guidelines on depictions of smoking. In those extremely few instances that smoking is shown in contemporary programs, the depiction must not be glamorized. We often request that adverse consequences or condemnation by other characters be shown. Mr. Chairman, you've asked me to comment on the assertion by some that broadcast of the Philip Morris Bill of Rights spot announcements violate the law. As noted in the recent letter to you from CBS General Counsel, we believe that these spots do not constitute advertising cigarettes within the meaning of the statute. The spots do not depict, mention, or allude to cigarettes, tobacco, or smoking in any manner, nor do they encourage or promote the sale or use of cigarettes. Instead, the spots consist entirely of a celebration of the freedoms contained in the Bill of Rights without relating those freedoms to any controversy, current or past, regarding cigarettes or smoking. Finally, with regard to cigarette company participation in televised sports events, our present experience at CBS is limited to auto racing. CBS televises the Daytona 500, Michigan 400, Talladega 500, the Twin 125s, and the Busch-Franheuser-Busch Clash. CBS purchases broadcast rights to these events from NASCAR, the sanctioning organization. A brand of cigarettes is an on-site sponsor of the year-long NASCAR racing series composed of these and other races. Similarly, CBS purchases broadcast rights to the Detroit Grand Prix from championship auto racing teams. Another brand of cigarettes is an on-site sponsor of the kart racing series and has a team car on the circuit. We're also aware that several brands of smokeless tobacco are on-site sponsors of NASCAR and kart races. CBS has no part in or control over the arrangements that these racing organizations have with their on-site sponsors or participants, and we receive no consideration from any tobacco company which sponsors these events. We purchase broadcast rights and cover the races as sports events. There's no consideration flowing to us from any tobacco companies, and we do not, quote, advertise cigarettes, end quote, within the meaning of the statute. Accordingly, we believe that we're in full compliance with the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act. Nevertheless, beyond what the law requires, we do make an affirmative effort to avoid, where possible, identifying or showing any tobacco-related signs, decals, or logos. We instruct our camera persons and directors to do their best to avoid showing this material on the air. That concludes my prepared statement, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Bresson. Mr. Gitter.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I was going to say good morning. I will say good afternoon. My name is Rick Gitter, and I am the executive in charge of NBC's Advertising Standards Department.
I can't hear you very well. Are you not speaking or you haven't got it turned on?
Thank you.
That's better.
Should I start again, or do we get that?
And I'm not turned on.
Okay.
Proceed.
As I was saying, I'm the executive in charge of NBC's Advertising Standards Department. The department has the responsibility for reviewing prior to telecast all commercial announcements carried on the NBC television network, as well as commercials which air on a national spot basis on NBC's 7 owned and operated television stations. It is our responsibility to ensure that the ads comply with NBC standards as well as applicable governmental laws and regulations. In your letter inviting us to appear, the subcommittee stated it was especially interested in hearing our views on 4 specific subjects. In light of the time limits, I'll be pleased to briefly state NBC's views on each of these matters. First, with respect to Dr. Sullivan's suggestion that the media donate time for anti-smoking announcements, I want you to know that NBC has, for many years and without charge, carried public service announcements on its network and owned stations pointing out the dangers of smoking cigarettes. The major emphasis in our public service efforts over the past couple of years has been on the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse. Nevertheless, during the last 3 calendar years, the network has fed to our affiliates approximately 400 anti-smoking announcements, in addition to PSAs concerning other matters of public importance. Moreover, as you probably know, various NBC News programs during the past year have also carried dozens of reports and interviews related to the dangers of using cigarettes and other tobacco products.
I have to interrupt at this point. Are you suggesting that you are managing the news?
Absolutely not.
Well, then why would you take credit for news programs that have a message? News programs are hard news, aren't they? Do you select news for the message?
Our professional journalists select...
Would you answer the question? Do you select news items because of the message?
No, sir. We select news items because of the public importance and because of the public's right to know. And in fact, if some of those messages and interviews contain very strong statements and reports antithetical to the tobacco industry or to smoking cigarettes, I don't see any...
That's a fortuitous occurrence, isn't it? It isn't because you selected them for that reason.
It is a fortuitous occurrence that is a salutary benefit to the people of the United States of America.
It is fortuitous. It is coincidental if it happens. If the news message were also newsworthy and would have a pro-tobacco flavor, you would show it too, wouldn't you?
If it were newsworthy?
Yes.
Absolutely, and we would attempt to balance it with opposing points of view.
Well, then don't take credit for your news as far as carrying a message. I mean, I would suggest you not. I apologize for being directory, but I would suggest to you that this is monstrous, that, and you are all doing it, or a couple of you are. You're suggesting that you get credit for news programs which are anti-tobacco.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm giving you more credit than to suggest you manage the news, and I'm sorry that you suggest that you do.
Mr. Chairman, NBC, ABC, CBS, and our cable brethren and all media are responsible for all the programs that they air. We take responsibility for the mistakes we make, and we ought to take responsibility for the good things that we do. And the issue here is the dangers of tobacco and cigarette smoking, and any way that we can contribute to assisting the public, whether it be by fortuity or by our strong intention, I would like to take credit. I would also...
I apologize for interrupting you. Maybe I'll get back to it on my own time, but I really couldn't resist the suggestion that is being made and was in prepared testimony that somehow the networks are carrying out an anti-tobacco program through their news. I say is one that does you a disservice. I give you credit for producing news which is based upon the value of the news, not for any message therein. And the implication that you are making is that you select these news items because of the anti-tobacco message. You don't do that.
That was not intended, sir, and I apologize for that. I would, however, like to add that Mr. Schneider referenced an entertainment program that had a very strong anti-smoking message. NBC and CBS and other broadcasters have done similar programs on a wide variety of issues where a great deal of forethought has gone into it, where the approval process is totally up to the network, and we've covered issues, AIDS, alcoholism, anti-drug, Alzheimer's disease, child abuse, and we do take credit for that. And I would also suggest that a half-hour, an hour, or a 2-hour program or mini-series on a very important issue, public issue, is far more impactful than a 30-second public service announcement, and we ought to be able to take credit very proudly for that kind of program offering, and it ought not be held against us. If you wish us to ignore our news programs and our interviews, which we do select, we do have a great deal of opportunity to select spokespersons to appear on our interviews, and we've
You're getting into managing again. You're treading on thin ice.
I apologize, and I will continue with my
I suggest you
statement.
get off of that because I think you're getting yourself into trouble. You don't select people for news on the basis of their anti-tobacco views.
We do if we feel that we need to balance a pro-tobacco viewpoint. We think that our news programs ought to have a fair balance of opposing views.
Then you are balancing, but we're not asking you to balance. We're asking you to put on anti-tobacco messages.
And we have, and
yeah, well, so that's what you're on. You're not on balancing.
May I continue?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. With reference to the California anti-smoking commercials, KNBC-TV, NBC's own television station in Los Angeles, has advised us that its policy is to accept paid anti-smoking spots for telecast. And subsequent to our delivery to your offices late Friday of our statement, I was advised by KNBC-TV that they had approved 2 of the California spots and had accepted an order for a schedule to commence the week of May 21st. Thirdly, with respect to whether the Philip Morris Bill of Rights advertisements violated the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act, please be advised that we carefully reviewed the spots, both at the time they were submitted and after you, Mr. Chairman, expressed your concerns. Since the commercials did not mention or depict cigarettes or little cigars, our legal counsel concluded that they did not constitute advertisements for those products as contemplated by the Act. Finally, concerning the telecast of sports events sponsored by cigarette companies, those events, like others that have no such sponsorship, are selected largely because NBC believes they will generate interest and excitement for our viewers. Signs in stadia or sports paraphernalia containing trademarks or logos are a fact of life and have been so for many years. NBC receives no payment for televising the signs or the various logo, nor are we in any way obliged by contract to televise them. Camera coverage at a particular site must be motivated by the action on the field of play. The cameras must necessarily take the scene as they and the spectators at the event find it. If an outfielder catches a ball against a wall adorned with commercial signage, incidental depiction of the sign is unavoidable. Similarly, if a particular auto race is called the Marlboro Grand Prix, it is impossible to let the audience know what they are watching without using that name to distinguish the event from some other Grand Prix. NBC appreciates this opportunity to be of assistance to the subcommittee on the 4 subjects you've raised, and I'll be delighted to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gitter. The gentleman from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask some questions for the record, if I might, from the 3 network representatives. Would you know what percentage of your advertising revenue comes from tobacco companies? And I would include RJR and Philip Morris in that category.
For tobacco products?
Yeah, for tobacco
0.
products.
You know, there's a ban
0.
on tobacco advertising. We are the only media that may not, by law, accept cigarette advertising.
That's right. That's correct. So
there is
there's
been no cigarette advertising since the late 70s.
The only exception would be we do accept advertising from time to time for regular-size cigars. We may not accept advertising for little cigars.
Well, I'd like to instruct the witness to answer the question. He made it very clear that he was talking about conglomerates, which you certainly do accept ads from RJR, from Philip Morris for their non-tobacco subsidiaries. He made that clear, I believe, and he asked you that question. If you can't answer it, tell him, but don't give him a non-responsive answer.
I'm sorry,
no, my question may not have been as clear as it should. Do you have any statistics that show your total revenue from, I guess the word is conglomerates that do have tobacco financial interests? Is there any way that you would know that, or could you provide that for the record?
CBS doesn't have that information available today. Our policies are made without regard to those kinds of numbers.
From your advertising revenue, you don't catalog what % comes from what industry?
If the sales department may do so, program practices does not.
What practices does not?
Program practices, the department that I represent.
There may be, Congressman, there may be statistical figures available from Nielsen or from other marketing devices with respect to what a particular conglomerate spends, but we would not have that information at this point.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, that may be some information that would be useful for the record if I could ask unanimous consent that you, as chairman, formally ask it. I think it's something that I know this member would be interested in getting.
Well, we will attempt to, we'll ask the staff to draft a letter pursuant to the gentleman's question, and without objection, it will be referred to the networks. Do we want to send it to anybody but the 3 networks? The ESPN and cable?
That's fine, Mr. Chairman.
ESPN and other logical targets for such a missive, and we'll see what they can come up with. I certainly understand that it may be difficult to come up with it, but I think the gentleman's correct in asking you to make the effort.
If I could also ask for the record, when you enter into an advertising agreement to sponsor, say, a sports event, is it the conscious policy of the 3 networks to avoid showing as many of the advertising signs as possible? Camera angles. I know in some cases it's inevitable. If somebody hits a fly ball to center field and the center fielder is backing up and there's a sign there, you can't very well not focus on the picture. But is it general policy for each of you to avoid showing an advertising sign?
Sure, and there are 2 possibilities. The most common possibility is when we cover a sports event, it's covered with our cameras, crews, directors, producers, standards people who are involved in the production. From time to time, we license or acquire outside packages, and that reduces somewhat of the control over that event with respect to placement of cameras, signs, etc.
Mr. Schneider, is that?
Yes, that's true.
And
Yes, we're in the business of selling advertising each time, so we try to avoid wherever it's possible any audio or video mention of any kind of product, tobacco or otherwise.
now, each of you have foundations, do you not, that contribute to worthy causes? Is that correct? Each of the 3 networks?
CBS does, yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
And I know ABC does.
I believe we do.
Do you have any of that funding in your foundations go to anti-smoking activities of any kind? Maybe not necessarily advertising, but do you go to drug-free programs in schools that deal with tobacco? Your foundations contribute funds to any activities that might be construed as anti-tobacco to warn people about health? I know that you do that in the alcohol area, but I'm talking about tobacco products.
I don't know that specifically. It's something that would be very easily determined, and of course we do enormous activities on air,
right?
Which is free time that could be revenue. Instead, it's donated time.
Well, if you could provide that for the record,
Sure.
the 3 of you. Is it your intent to increase the number of public service spots? I noticed that each of you had an increasing number, 88, 89, on tobacco products. Has the network made a program practice decision to increase the number of public service spots in tobacco as opposed to, say, another AIDS research? Or how does within your network, in terms of the public service commitment to an issue, does tobacco warning people about the health hazards of tobacco, warned with other worthy endeavors that our society might pursue?
At NBC, it's a rather high priority. You have to understand that there are at least 100 or more very worthy public organizations, in effect, standing in line and waiting for their opportunity to get airtime. And judgments have to be made to the various causes of the moment. At the moment, NBC's highest priority is to free public announcements, including spots that we have produced ourselves in the area of alerting the public to the dangers of drug and alcohol abuse. Going back to 87, 86, for example, beginning of 88, our highest priority at that time was the AIDS crisis. I note that CBS has a large number of anti-smoking spots. I think it's probably a very useful and helpful development that the three networks might have different priorities, since there are so many organizations that are literally begging to get on the air. You have to make those judgments. At the moment, I can speak for NBC, our highest priority is anti-drug and anti-alcohol abuse, and smoking is right up as a very high priority.
Mr. Schneider?
Well, as I've indicated in our statement, drug abuse and literacy are two major campaigns that we've concentrated on. There is a rotation schedule. The Advertising Council submits a number of programs. Individuals submit a number of programs, and there are two people in broadcast standards who review these requests, review the public service announcements, and provide them in a rotation schedule.
Our procedures work pretty much the same way. It's a function of sitting down, discussing priorities, whatever issues are most important at a given time. Like the other networks, the anti-drug and anti-alcohol commitment has been very strong, but CBS has always placed, I think, the next highest commitment on warning people of the dangers of cancer, and much of that is smoking related, and we have a long history of doing that.
Now, let me ask you a question about if a state passes a referendum, as California did, does the network have any control over its affiliates on whether the affiliate would accept or reject an ad? I guess there was one isolated incident where one station initially rejected the ad. Do you all, for the record, have any of the three of you rejected an anti-smoking ad on a network basis?
Yes, we have. Let me answer your question. We do not have any jurisdiction. We do not have any jurisdiction, Mr. Congressman, over an affiliate. We do have a general policy overview with respect to our own stations. Capital Cities owns a station in San Francisco, Fresno, and Los Angeles. With respect to the judgment made on the commercials that you saw, the individual station manager has the responsibility to make that call within the market under the operational policy of our company. Each of the managers spoke to each other, they consulted with the legal department, and they agreed to take 3 of the 4 that was accepted by reason of the fact that the 3 commercials dealt with the hazards of smoking and not necessarily with the personal attack, as was personified in the first commercial here, dealing with the secret executives. As head of the policy of this company, I certainly support their decision. I think that the commercial that was rejected dealt not only with a disparagement and false disparagement, which we have rejected with respect to other advertisers and was inappropriate for broadcast. I think also it went to the intention and motivation and made it attributes as to intention and motivation of certain executives to which there is no substantiation that I have seen as to that, in fact, is what cigarette executives think, and felt it was inappropriate in terms of the dictates of the law itself, which talked about education. And it didn't appear to me that that particular spot dealt with the question of education.
Now, I didn't see that spot. I must have gone out. I saw the last 2 spots. But, I mean, Mr. Schneider, you seem like a very reasonable, articulate person. The concern that I have is, what about TV ads that hit home on the character of a politician? I mean, what is the difference between your censoring?
Under Section 315, we cannot touch those ads. You're quite right. When a politician renders a personal attack, he is protected under the law from any editing or review that any station can exercise under the law. And as a matter of fact, the stations are protected against libel actions for the very same reason. So there is a distinction between...
But what about when my opponent attacks me and calls me a good-for-nothing whatever?
Can't do anything about it.
All of which is not true, as you know.
And absolutely.
But if that is an independent party, if that is an independent entity that is saying that, it's not my opponent.
If it is not your opponent, we have the right to edit.
And you do that.
And we do that.
You do that.
Yes, sir.
So this incident is isolated where that ad was rejected. You accepted the 3 other ads. You didn't deal at all with the overall buy of the anti-smoking group. In other words, if they committed the anti-smoking, I guess it was the Human Services Department of California, to spend $1 million, you did not reduce the $1 million. You eliminated one of the ads.
It's totally the operation of the review of commercial. The procedure clearance is independent of the sales department. A commercial submitted in storyboard or in script form is reviewed totally before a buy is made. In fact, in this case, all the scripts and storyboards were submitted before they even knew whether or not there wasn't a buy that would be intended.
Now, and I don't mean to differ here with the chairman, my impression of many of you, especially at the local level, affiliates, and I think even the networks, I've seen some of those programs that you've done on anti-smoking and health hazards. I think they're commendable. I also have seen an increase in public service spots, affiliates, especially on the drunk driving issue. I saw that very directly done by my broadcasters. Now, I don't know if every broadcaster is the same or has the same social conscience, but it would seem to me that, and I guess it's not popular these days to say nice things about the networks, but I have noticed that increase, and I commend you for it. The question I would have is, what other steps voluntarily might you take, either in the foundation area or the public service area? Are there any of your networks contemplating additional resources committed to trying to reduce cigarette smoking in this country? What other initiatives might you take? You've got the power of the medium. You've got the foundation activity. Do you have any of your brains working on other ways that you might be contributing to the public good here without necessarily getting a mandated restriction? Why don't I start with you, Mr. Schneider, and then. All right.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry, sir. I don't know. I think we ought to give some more thought to it. We've given a great deal of thought, as Bresson remarked. The 3 networks voluntarily, in the 1970s, probably late 1960s, then under the auspices of the now-defunct NAB Code, of which Mr. Schneider was a senior member, voluntarily decided that it was about time we ought to work with the Hollywood producers. Cigarette smoking with youngsters' heroes was rife in programming in feature films, and on a voluntary basis over a period of almost 2 decades, working with producers, virtually eliminated the depiction of smoking in entertainment programs on the 3 networks by figures likely to be perceived by youngsters as role models. I mean, that was, I thought, a very commendable activity. In addition to that, we've recounted the millions of dollars of free airtime. This is We are an industry, our lifeblood is paid advertiser time. We don't get the advertisers, the viewer doesn't get the over-the-air programming free. We have donated a great deal of time, not only for anti-smoking announcements, but as I said before, for those hundreds of very worthy organizations that line up each year for their free time. I'm sure one or more of our foundation arms and the corporate arms does make contributions to worthy organizations in the anti-smoking area or related, whether it's to American Lung, American Heart, or whatever. We're open to suggestions. I mean, and any worthwhile suggestions, I'm sure certainly NBC would be happy to take back to its management for careful consideration.
Mr. Schneider?
Well, I think that just a week or so ago, the three networks put on a simulcast dealing with drug abuse, a cartoon program, which was carried simultaneously to tell about the evils of drug abuse. I think the effectiveness of a program like that is difficult to measure, except the fact that the number of children that watch that program. I think Mr. Gitter talked about news and information. It seems to me that the most important contribution we can make is by the consciousness raising of the difficulty and the health hazards that relate to cigarette smoking. I think the programs that we mentioned that we do and which reach young audiences are probably as effective, if not more so, than the preaching that anti-smoking messages do. But that's a judgment call that we make in terms of the agenda that each of us carries in this area and the many issues mentioned about AIDS, child abuse. You can go through the litany of the alphabet and find 100 different subject matters that we try to deal with. Essentially, we are an entertainment medium as well as an information education medium, and therefore that balance has to be achieved.
Just this committee's inquiry alone has, I think, sensitized all of us once again at CBS to the concerns that you have, which we have shared for a long time, and our need to continue to act responsibly in the area. And we will do so. We will continue to put on our public service announcements. We will continue to be responsible in our depiction of cigarette usage and entertainment programming, knowing the effect it might have on people. I think that senior management is well aware of my appearance today and of your concerns and the Congressman's concerns. We will continue to look at what we can do. I don't have any quick remedies right now for that.
Yes, you might. Mr. Chairman, if I could have one last question. I know you've been very indulgent. There's been a depiction of the tobacco companies, RJR, Philip Morris, as being, and others, totally insensitive, unwilling to bend on cigarette advertising, on tobacco advertising, on targeting special groups, women, minorities, for special treatment because they're losing revenue, they're losing smokers. In the dealings with your network, is there, I guess without getting you into libel difficulty, could each of you attempt to characterize the tobacco companies' restraint or lack of responsibility in this area at the same time that they have to deal with a lawful product that they're trying to sell? Would you venture to give them any advice? Has there been any cases? I guess an inference was made that, is it RJR that has any, that has some ownership of, is it ABC or NB, Capital Cities?
ESPN, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. Does RJR have some?
Yes. Nabisco, RJR, owns 20% of ESPN, and Capital Cities owns 80% of ESPN.
Yeah, so, but that's the only connection.
Yes.
It's ESPN, not ABC. And
No.
you all, and ABC owns ESPN, or Capital Cities owns ESPN.
owns 80% of ESPN.
80%, okay. I tossed you kind of a difficult question, but
It's not. I mean, my department reviews somewhere between 40 and 45,000 commercials in an early form each year, and ultimately 20,000 of which will get made into final form. One set of commercials that you could characterize as being submitted by a tobacco company are the ones that Chairman Lukin has under discussion. Those are the Bill of Rights. In every other instance, whether it be Kraft General Foods or Miller or Nabisco, the dealings are not with the tobacco entity, the top company, but with the individual subsidiary that is responsible for producing the product that legally may be advertised on the air. So again, with that one lone exception, where I felt, frankly, that the dealings were honorable, we have no dealings with tobacco companies. NBC does not.
Mr. Schneider?
No, I think that you deal with each product as it comes in from its marketing agency and review it on that basis. Where there are institutional ads, you look at it from institutional purposes and whether or not they are trying to proffer anything other than the message that is set forth, as it did with the Philip Morris.
In point of fact, our dealings are generally with the agencies who create the ads and very rarely with the principals themselves.
Let's say that tobacco advertising were still permitted. Let's say if RJR came to you and said, let's do a TV ad on the Dakota. You saw the ad they did in magazines. What would you tell them? And you knew that that was targeted to blacks between 18 and 23, and it would be shown in cities that had a large black population. Would you have would rejecting that ad have First Amendment implications, or would you have your own rationale and standards in your own departments to reject an ad like that? And focus specifically on that ad. I don't know if you all saw it, but it got enough controversy that, and I think I described it reasonably accurately. Would you have accepted that ad on television?
If we feel that an ad is racially denigrating, we will not accept it despite the fact that it's from a lawful product. And we have standards which hold us to a level of good taste, not only legality, but also tastefulness in the presentation. And so if we found something to be racially denigrating, we would not accept it, and we would have the right to withdraw approval or to reject approval at the outset.
And you have rejected ads that...
Yes, of course we have.
You
right,
all
I think
have.
there are guidelines that would deal with stereotyping, with questions of taste, appropriate scheduling. We are also mindful of First Amendment rights of freedom of commercial speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been most generous with your time.
Mr. Schneider, under questioning of the gentleman from New Mexico with reference to counter tobacco advertising, or that is PSAs, you mentioned the cartoon on drug abuse. I happened to see that cartoon. I won't comment as to whether I regularly watch cartoons, but I did watch that one because it was advertised and I wanted to see it. I believe that it mentioned cigarettes not once. Is that right?
To my knowledge, it dealt with the illegal drug usage.
Sir, do you know? It would be nice if we had some facts once. Do you know, did it mention cigarettes at all?
I'd have to look at it again to see whether or not it did. My inclination, but to the best of my knowledge, it did not.
The only other drugs than marijuana, cocaine, the usual, it mentioned, I believe, alcohol as a gateway drug, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
But it didn't mention tobacco at all.
It did not mention tobacco to the best of my knowledge.
Or refer to it in any way. It seems to me that you folks have a problem here on conflicts of interest, or potentially. you say that, Mr. Schneider, I believe that you don't have, at least in your prepared testimony, you don't really have too much time for tobacco because you're concentrating, or was it Mr. Gitter? As you're concentrating on illiteracy and drugs. Is that right?
Drugs and alcohol abuse.
Know what you said, too?
I said illiteracy and drug abuse.
And drug abuse. Not, and you don't include cigarettes in drug abuse, do you?
No, I do not.
That's interesting in itself. But in any event, that seems to be the case. Now, of course, as we've discussed, there are big companies, Philip Morris, big advertisers, RJR Nabisco, which has shown its power because it cut off the advertising agency from, by use of the non-tobacco subsidiary in intimidating them. So you have an economic interest in some of this, but you don't have any economic interest when it comes, I mean, you have an economic interest in regard to cigarettes, but there aren't any cocaine advertisers, are there? There's no illiteracy advertiser. And I don't want to sound too gross about the thing, but I think that's the case. There is all this interlocking, linking between the tobacco companies, as powerful as they are, have ensured that that is the situation. And you come in and say, we're helpless. We can't do anything. We got to put on the program that shows, where are we? NBC shows in Marlboro Grand Prix, Marlboro logo 49% of the time. Mr. Gitter, what about that? This is an NBC question.
Oh, okay.
If it shows 49% of the time the Marlboro logo, isn't that an ad for Marlboros? Could you answer that question?
Yes.
Could you answer that question?
Yes, sir,
or no?
I can.
Isn't that an ad for Marlboros?
Not with respect to as it appeared on NBC. It is not an advertisement contemplated by the Federal Cigarette.
No, that's not the question of what you contemplate.
Right.
The question is, objectively, we can decide, outside of your contemplation and what your intention, whether a particular segment is an advertisement for a product or not. We have to decide that, don't we? Don't we have to decide that? Or else we can't determine whether we're complying with the law, right?
Well, it is an advertisement.
But isn't that right? Do you answer any questions direct?
Yes,
I have
sir.
to say that.
Yes, sir.
Don't we have to determine whether it's an ad for cigarettes in order to determine whether you're complying with the law?
I'm not sure that that question can get an easy yes or no.
Well, then you don't ever know whether you're complying with the law, because you don't ever know whether it constitutes an ad for a cigarette.
In relation to
and sir, I'm going to distribute your
like
answers, I think, to the entire Congress, because this is a very simple question. And the tobacco companies are vague and evasive, and they say we don't know whether there are people being killed by cigarettes. Now, you're saying you don't know ever whether you are dealing with an ad for a cigarette or not.
No, sir, I did not. Please, if you give me an opportunity to respond, I'd be happy to elaborate. I just don't think that some questions are fully give the appropriate texture by a simple yes or no answer.
That's a direct question.
The Marlboro placed advertising in the arena of that Grand Prix. That is an ad in relation to Marlboro and the arena. With respect to NBC's telecast of its coverage of that auto race, that was not an advertisement contemplated by the Federal Cigarette Labeling and Advertising Act, which bars NBC and other broadcasters from having cigarette advertisements.
Well, sir, I think you disagree with the Attorney General. The Attorney General of the United States in 1982, through Mr. William Baxter, Assistant Attorney General, Antitrust Division, in writing a letter to a congressman whose name has been expunged for some reason, but in any event, it is an opinion that has been circulated, and it is signed by Mr. Baxter, and he says that, and I quote, "We recently became aware of plans to advertise cigarettes in the ring area of a televised championship boxing match. The cigarette name and logo would have been prominently displayed on the floor and the posts of the boxing ring and would have been shown on a repeated basis in the broadcast of the match. Because we believe the act would have been violated if those plans had been carried out, we acted to prevent the violation." Now that's on all fours, isn't it? Because the event, as the stock car race was a stock car race, the event here was a boxing match. But the boxing match would have incidentally carried the repetition over and over again of the name Marlboro. Now this you've done, this ESPN did, and the Attorney General of the United States, through the Assistant Attorney General, says that that would be a violation. Now you're disagreeing with him?
Well, we haven't had an opportunity to review that letter.
I didn't think I'd get an answer from you. That's pretty simple, isn't it? The repetition over and over again of the name constitutes an ad. All right, I'm not going to get an answer from you. But what about responsibility? You didn't contemplate it, Mr. Gitter, but it happened. It just so happened. And you couldn't do anything about it? You mean you didn't have any choice as to whether or not to put on that program?
You're talking about the Marlboro Grand Prix?
Yes.
May I respond to that, sir?
Absolutely. That's the question. Did the devil make you do it, or what happened?
I'd be happy to answer that. I must say that the choices were very difficult, that it involves a very frustrating circumstance and some very, very hard choices. As I alluded to in my statement, NBC covers hundreds of hours of sporting events.
Sir, I don't have much time. Would you allude to the answer to the question? We're still, you're now off into what you do otherwise.
No, but
we only got a couple of minutes.
I'll make it brief, but it really relates to it. As I said in the statement, our objective is to follow the action on the field of play, the participants, and the ball. And we do that in baseball or football or basketball, etc. Auto racing is a very unusual animal. It's an animal where the ball happens to be 18 feet long and weighs 4,000 pounds, and there are 20 of them, and they race around a ring that is absolutely adorned with commercial signia of every type and...
Sir, that's not the facts. The facts we gave you are that 49% of the time Marlboro, not other things. Now, I'm tired of this evasion. We're dealing with the facts of the question. 49% of the time Marlboro was shown there.
I dare say that if that monitor could also have found 49% of Pennzoil, Goodrich, Bosch, and a whole variety of things.
Wait
that
a minute.
is the
That's
nature.
Like the question of how many halves are there.
Well,
there's not 49%.
But this is the choice, sir. The choice.
Are you saying that that each one of them could be on the screen 49% of the time?
Absolutely, absolutely. When the car pulls into the pit, every member of the pit crew is wearing insignia. When the driver gets his award, he takes his insignia helmet.
We just saw it, Mr. Gitter. We saw it. Were you here? The Camel Supercross?
That was not NBC's program. I
know, but it's the same thing. It's the same thing as the Post. That was Marlboro that they picked out. Now, if you want to change the facts, go ahead. If you don't want to answer the question, don't answer the question. But 49%, the doctor said, was Marlboro. It didn't have 49% of anything else. And if it did, the impression came over 49% Marlboro. Now, that 49% Marlboro is part of the acceptability to kids, 68% of whom smoke Marlboro. Now, that's our responsibility. That's yours, your company's responsibility. You're helping to enhance the name to 68% of the kids who smoke Marlboro. Isn't that right, Mr. Gitter?
I don't know if that's true, sir.
Now, that's what the tobacco companies say. They don't know whether, in fact, medically, tobacco is harmful or not. But you put the program on, and everybody but you knows about it. We're not going to ask anybody else who has an opinion, but you have a financial interest. You and the tobacco companies and the advertisers have a financial interest, and you don't know.
Well, we have part
What about the ESPN? Was that a repetition of
it was.
Camel?
It's the nature of the event. That's what I'm trying to say, sir. And the choice
but the effect of it, we're back to the effect.
I know.
The effect of it is an ad for Camel, isn't it?
It might be, but the choice...
It enhances the name Camel, is that right?
It enhances the name Campbell and their company.
And it gives credibility then to the word name Camel, doesn't it?
It probably does.
Then that's an ad, isn't it?
I'm not sure that it is.
Oh, you're not sure? Well, it has the effect of an ad because it helps that product.
But you see, sir, what I was trying to say is that given the nature of the event, the choice that we have is either to do the event or not to do it at all.
That's right. And you had the choice not to do it. And ESPN had the choice not to do it. We assumed that ESPN knew that that track was lined throughout its, apparently from the camera angles, throughout the whole, they didn't have fence posts for the track. They had camel pennants. And they had the camel sign way up in the roof that every time, later on, watch the whole thing, every time that guy got real high, you could see the camel sign. And we didn't, if you get a few more minutes into it, I'd say at least 20, 30 times he went under this tunnel with a big camel across it. That's the best camel ad that I've ever seen, in my humble opinion. And I'm a consumer. I think that's good enough. And the ESPN had the ability to decline that ad, right? Or that.
Then the viewer would not have had the opportunity to see it, and that's the hard choice that's made.
Is that a hard choice for you, Mr. Gitter? Whether or not to advertise cigarettes or not to show, to deny the viewer a motorcycle race, is that a hard choice for you?
Well, I respectfully disagree that that's advertising cigarettes in relation to the broadcaster who is the medium.
You've just agreed that it enhances it now. Is that a hard choice for you, to enhance the cigarette name as opposed to denying the public the right to see a motorcycle race?
Well,
Would you answer that?
I did not come here to argue for cigarette advertising.
You came here and you answered every other question where it elicited a favorable response. But when the tough ones come, you didn't come here to argue. That's the problem with the people who front for the tobacco interests. And I say that with calculation. That's the result of what you're doing.
I think that's
you are representing the tobacco interests when you argue for them. Any comment? I mean, I don't want to cut you off.
No, I think I've said enough.
What are the PSAs that you've all shown? You say 8.5 million of PSAs on tobacco per year. Is that what you said, Mr. President?
That's correct, sir.
What kind of details can you give us on that? What kind of details do you have?
Well, I can tell you the names of the organizations who supplied us with some of these. I can give you the different ones that they provided,
No, I don't want
number
the names
of
of the
areas.
organization. Describe the content, what they are, and how you know whether they've been shown. You say, how many messages is that? Were those messages all shown?
They're fed out to the affiliates, 2,200
you said
of this.
fed out. I don't know what that means.
We send them out to our affiliates. We air them.
Do you know that they're shown?
I don't know how many of them
You mean
are
that they
shown.
might be shown repetitively?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Well, you gave us a number of how many messages you sent out, right? How many was it?
2,200 messages.
Does that mean 2,200 were shown, or 2,200 impressions shown, or would they have been, or maybe less, or maybe more?
2,200 messages, most of which are 30-second, 10-second, or 15-second spots.
Yes.
Are sent to our 210 affiliates.
You're just repeating yourself, but does that mean that there are that many impressions, or impressions, okay? Is that a good
No,
word?
I'm talking about messages. A 30-second
I
spot.
told you I don't know what message means in this context. I'm looking for some help.
A 30-second spot, like a commercial length
That means it's fed through the affiliates and shown, right?
It is shown.
2,200 times it's shown. Is that right?
No, I'm talking about commercials that are not paid for.
We are not
They are
talking about whether
equivalent.
they're paid or not. We're just talking about how many times they're shown. Do you know? Does that mean 2,200 of them are shown? Is that what that means in the language that you're using?
2,200 public service messages are sent out by CBS during the course of last year.
And
That's
that
correct.
means they're shown. 2,200 are shown on the TV screens, right?
We feed them out to our affiliates for airing. I don't know what they show.
Well, does anybody interrupt them, or does that go to the public? You're feeding it to the affiliate.
And they feed most of them out to their local viewers.
Most of them. That's what I have been asking. How many? Does that mean,
I have no idea.
Does that mean less than 2,200 may have actually been shown?
I have no idea the number. We have no way of calculating that. We would
Well,
have
then how
to.
do you get the value if you don't know how many have been
It's
shown?
the value of the network airtime.
Well, then you do know that they're shown.
We know that most of them are shown.
90%?
I can't put a figure on it.
Well, then how can you put a figure on the value if you don't know whether they're actually being shown?
Because of the value of the network airtime. That's the way we calculate.
Network airtime isn't worth a dime if it isn't shown, if that's what you're saying. But you're saying you don't know how many of them are actually carried by the stations.
That's right. I have no way of knowing that. We would have to.
Well, then your figure of 8.5 million is meaningless because you don't know how many of them were actually shown.
If you believe it's meaningless, I can only show it in terms of its relevance to
Is
and
that such an
comparison
argumentative
to other.
thing? You're saying it's $8.5 million. The value is in being shown to the viewers, isn't it?
That's correct.
And you don't know how many times it's been shown to the viewers.
I would have no idea what the.
For all you know, 50% of the time, the affiliates could have short-circuited it and not shown it.
That's correct.
I've never seen one. I've been asking people around here, and we're having a hard time finding people who have seen
We
tobacco
ran one last
PSA.
Sunday.
I see all kinds of drugs. I see the alcohol. Well, I don't really see alcohol. What I see is drunken driving, which is not anti-alcohol, but we're not into that. But we do have a lot of drunken driving, and we do have a lot of drug abuse, but I don't see $8.5 million on CBS. My kid works at a CBS affiliate in Cincinnati. I watch CBS all the time. My wife makes me do that. And I always say that to the other affiliates. But anyway, I don't recall seeing this $8.5 million last year of tobacco PS. Do you know when they're shown?
They're shown all throughout the day.
Do you have any idea?
I don't have them
Where is
listed
that
by day
question?
part. There was one shown on the network last Sunday morning in our religious program.
What is the nature of that?
That one was about a New York City policeman who recorded before he died, when he had lung cancer, a message saying that smoking cigarettes is like a time bomb. In fact, he has been given less than 6 months to live, and as he speaks and you hear the audio, after seeing him sitting down taping this message, you see the pictures of his funeral. And it was produced by the Martin Himmel Foundation for us. It's one of the very...
And what was the lead into that? Because they said he died of smoking.
It's a young man, a New York City policeman, who taped the message before he died, while he knew he was dying of lung cancer, telling people this, that smoking is a time bomb and that it's preventable.
You say that was on Sunday morning?
That's correct. We had it on Sunday morning in our religious special, which aired the 22nd of April.
Well, maybe that's why I haven't seen him. I'm in church on Sunday morning.
Well,
Or a lot of people are. Shown any other time than Sunday morning?
the messages are shown throughout the day. I don't have a listing of the times that these messages are shown.
Ms. Bresson, you mentioned that you try to ensure that smoking is not glamorized in primetime entertainment programs. What about the soaps? Do you take the same precautions on the soaps? That's not
No, our
prime time,
guidelines apply equally to prime time as well as to the soaps.
You did mention prime time, though.
Yes, I did, because it's more indicative of the commitment that's also out in the Hollywood community. We deal with many more producers and writers in prime time than we do in the afternoon, where we deal with 4 programs and have had that same schedule for the last many years. We deal with scores of directors and producers and writers in prime time every season, and they have all been very cooperative. And my thrust of that point was to say that there has been a particular amount of cooperation among the suppliers of our prime time entertainment.
Yeah, on showing these commercials. I'd like to get from each, I'll ask unanimous consent, and I'm not sure how to phrase the question, but I'd like to get from each all the information that you can supply, all of the details all the documentation, copies of the, that is videos of the PSAs with reference to the PSAs on anti-smoking for the last 3 years, and break it down on an annual basis. Is that a fair question?
Much of it's probably not available.
It's not available? Well, I don't have time to go into that right now, so we'll answer as best you can, and we'll continue to hash it out as to whether or not, as to what is available. But if certain details aren't available, then give us as much as you can. That's why I'm having trouble specifying it, because I realize some of these things can be problems. I'd like each of you to answer do you have any problem with the statement of the Mr. Sullivan, Dr. Sullivan, that cigarettes are the only legal product on the market that are deadly when used as intended, claiming an estimated 390,000 deaths each year? In the U.S., smoking is by far the country's leading cause of preventable death. Any of the three of you, all of you agree with that statement?
I have no reason to disagree with it.
You agree with it, Mr. Gitter? Mr. Schneider?
I'm sure of that, but I suppose you could say the same thing about guns.
Sir, it says the leading cause of preventable death. As I indicated in the first place, guns is one of a whole host of things that when you add them all up, they don't even come close to the deaths of... Well, I gave you Dr. Sullivan. That's not me talking. And you're aware that the President's representative says we were aware he was going to do it, and the President agrees he did the right thing when he made that statement. Where were we?
You want to ask him to supply facts about the soaps?
Yeah, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that you supply information with reference to the soaps. Also, just specify the efforts to de-glamorize or not to make glamorous the soaps use of cigarettes as a prop used in the programming. I think we're running out of time. Just ask you one more question. These folks were here talking about corporation policy. One thing they might have said is that oil companies should follow policies favorable to the environment even if it costs profits. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that, Mr. Schneider?
About oil companies?
Yeah. You have an opinion on that?
I really have no opinion on that.
Do you have an opinion on that,
No,
Mr.
sir.
Skinner? Ms. Bresson, you don't have an
It's a
opinion?
matter for their corporate management
I can
and
readily answer. I
shareholders.
think they should. Most members of the public would say readily, absolutely. They should favor the environment even if it costs profits. But you two aren't sure. How about companies ceasing doing business in South Africa even if it costs profits? Do you think they should, Mr. Schneider?
I have no comment on that.
Mr. Gitter?
I believe my own company has policies that are similar to that.
Ms. Preston?
That, too, is a question of corporate management and their shareholders. It's
And you
between
can't
them.
speak for the corporate management and the shareholders? Well, all right.
No.
Well, do you agree that the health, or do you agree with Dr. Koop's finding that cigarettes are addictive, Mr. Gitter?
I'm a smoker. I absolutely believe and know it.
Mr. Schneider?
Yes, I do agree that that's true.
Ms. Bresson?
I believe that it is.
Do you agree that there is a causal connection between the health effects that have been described, the smoking cigarettes and the premature death of 390,000 Americans? You believe that, Mr. Gitter? Mr. Schneider?
Sir.
There's an epidemiology that states that, correct. I don't believe there is a clinical causal connection.
Do you believe it?
Do I believe it? Sure, I believe it.
Do you accept it? I mean,
no, I don't accept it.
You don't accept it?
I accept it as a matter of law.
They're the company that's linked into RJ.
Well, it's hauntingly familiar with the tobacco company's response.
Well, you asked me my personal opinion.
I know.
You asked me as a matter of law.
Well, no, I'm not asking you as a matter of law. You're here as representing the company. I just ask you to do your best you can representing the company in these matters. We asked the CEO of the company to come in and talk to us. These are very important questions. These are the answers to these questions that lead the tobacco companies away from getting out of the tobacco business.
Yeah, I think that a distinction has to be drawn, as you did before, about the drug abuse program. Is, to my knowledge, cocaine, heroin, and marijuana are illegal products. To my knowledge, cigarettes is not a illegal product. And I think when you talk about programs, when you asked about the cartoon program, we dealt with the manifestation of demonstrating the use of evil, of illegal products, which by law may not be sold. I mean, the Congress certainly can deal with these issues, but I don't think you can expect those of us who are dealing in a field of legality to pass laws which is within the province of the Congress.
If, you know, a lot of people, I'll just wind up with this, a lot of very reputable people believe that we should make cocaine, heroin legal. In England, I believe it is. Now, if it were, that's not a big hypothetical, is it? Would you then believe that it would be appropriate to advertise those products because they are legal?
I think I have to live by the law of society.
But no, that's not the question. Would you just use that basis? Because it's legal, you can't restrict it. Now, if these products
I said you
were made legal, we're now illegal. If they were made legal, shouldn't we still have restrictions on advertising them?
You certainly could.
No, shouldn't we?
That's a judgment that you have to make as a legislator, not as I have to make as a citizen.
You are totally in agreement with the tobacco companies. All of your answers are. All right, I have no further questions. I thank you very much for your attendance. The subcommittee will be adjourned.
That concludes this hearing of the House Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Transportation and Hazardous Material. A reminder to join us Wednesday for live coverage of an argument in federal appellate court. The U.S. Court of Military Appeals will hear arguments regarding the constitutionality of the military's death penalty. Our coverage includes statements by a number of groups who have filed briefs in the case and an interview with the court's historian. That's live coverage of arguments before the U.S. Court of Military Appeals, Wednesday beginning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 on the West Coast. Up next, a look at the U.S. food supply with the American Chemical Society.
Wednesday on C-SPAN, a special edition of our series, America and the Courts. You'll hear oral arguments in the case of the United States versus Curtis, in which counsel will argue the constitutionality of the military.